Chapter 631, Striking a Fortune. The six-fingered formless hand's appearance was so sudden that Fang Yuan only had the time to raise his head. The light blue radiance shone down on his face as his sight was filled with the giant light blue hand. The formless hand did not show any notions of stopping, grabbing towards Fang Yuan, completely shrouding over his body. "Junior brother!" Tai Bai Yunsheng shouted in fright. The next moment, however, this six-fingered formless fist loosened up and spread open. Fang Yuan's figure showed up 500 steps away. The six-fingered formless hand had grabbed at nothing. Flash Bug Gu. This Gu was a rare rank 5 space path movement Gu. Fang Yuan had to spend a lot of efforts to purchase it in Treasure Yellow Heaven. Huff. Tai Bai Yunsheng let out a breath of turbid air, a giant stone lifted off his heart. Tai Bai Yunsheng knew Fang Yuan was unable to react properly because he had just came out. In truth, it was nothing difficult for flying masters to evade these formless hands. Close call. Fang Yuan's body let out cold sweat from the fright. He had much more understanding of formless hands than others, as such, he knew their threat level clearly. Formless Hand is Thieving Heaven Demon Venerable's killer move. It can range from 1 finger to 9 fingers, respectively, able to seize rank 1 to rank 9 Gu worms. They can even seize the vital Gu without any problems. If that six-fingered formless hand succeeded in grabbing me, I would have definitely lost either Spring-Autumn Cicada or fixed immortal travel. My luck is too bad, it actually provoked such a catastrophe. Fang Yuan rapidly flew, dodging the pursuit of the formless hand while observing his surroundings. True Inheritance secluded domain had already fallen into complete chaos. True Inheritance meteors and formless hands filled one sight. Gu masters flew around in disorder, some were evading the formless hands, some cried out in grief after their Gu worms were seized, while some used all their strength to attack the formless hands. It seems that they have found out already. Once a formless hand captures a Gu worm, it will clench its fist. This is the moment it can be attacked. When it is in its spread-out palm form, it is almost completely immune to all attacks and can only be dodged. Fang Yuan recalled the relevant information on formless hands. He was very familiar with the formless hands. In his previous life, Ma Hongyun had successively obtained a portion of Giant Sun Immortal Venerable and Thieving Heaven Demon Venerable's inheritance, also obtaining a similar method of capturing Gu worms. He had used this method many times in the Great Battle of the 5 Regions, resulting in the disastrous loss of many strong enemies and making them flee. Fang Yuan had thus researched a lot on this. Fang Yuan continued to dodge, use Flash Bug Gu, Wind Flower Gu, Eagle Rise Gu and so on before he was able to pull apart a huge distance, making the six-fingered formless hand chasing him to change its target. He immediately sent a portion of his consciousness to inspect his immortal aperture. There were remnants of heaven and earth qi in True Inheritance secluded domain. Ever since Fang Yuan came out, his immortal aperture had been crazily absorbing these heaven and earth qi, growing rapidly. In just a short while, his immortal aperture had expanded to over 2,000 square kilometers and was still growing. At the same time, the time flow inside the immortal aperture was starting to become faster than the outside world. From a 1-to-1 ratio, it increased to 6 times as fast. Damn it! Fang Yuan suddenly frowned and his face paled. The change in the immortal aperture was going smoothly, but the problem appeared in the first aperture. More accurately, the problem was the Spring-Autumn Cicada. Spring-Autumn Cicada was recovering rapidly and the first aperture was already showing signs of being unable to bear the huge pressure from it. Oh no! When an immortal aperture is born, not only does the space enlarge, the time flow also changes. The change in the time flow is the main reason an immortal aperture can turn into a small world and attract a tributary of the River of Time. Spring-Autumn Cicada feeds on the water of the River of Time, and now being so close to the source, it is able to drink a lot and accelerate its recovery speed. Fong Yuan was able to instantly understand what was going on. Since the last activation of Spring-Autumn Cicada, which had fortunately succeeded, it had been slowly recovering. It has been a long time since Fong Yuan arrived in Northern Plains. Spring-Autumn Cicada was gradually recovering, causing the pressure on the first aperture to increase day by day. The first aperture was already at rank 5 peak stage and should have been able to endure for some time according to Fong Yuan's estimation. But this unforeseen event had greatly shifted the time limit to an earlier date. Since rebirth, Spring-Autumn Cicada had been a hidden danger to Fong Yuan. Now that Fong Yuan was advancing to a Gu immortal, this hidden danger had expanded to a serious danger that directly pushed itself to Fong Yuan's sight. Damn it! Fong Yuan gritted his teeth. He suddenly descended, a formless hand passed by his hair, grabbing at the air. For now, Fong Yuan had no way to deal with this situation. The immortal aperture must be successfully created, otherwise all his efforts would go to waste. Without a Gu immortal's strength, it would be impossible for him to continue contending. However, Spring-Autumn Cicada also could not be ignored. Crack! A huge sound echoed in True Inheritance' secluded domain like some important thing had shattered, causing palpitation in everyone's heart. Everyone paused and hurriedly looked up. Like an eggshell that was smashed, countless cracks appeared on True Inheritance' secluded domain. The cracks rapidly enlarged and let the outside world's light flow in. At the same time, many formless hands also squeezed in through the cracks, a 7-fingered formless hand among them. The Gu masters let out shocked cries at the sight of so many giant light blue hands. Why are there so many giant hands? This is bad. Look, a 7-fingered giant hand has actually squeezed in. With the endless giant light blue hands flying in True Inheritance' secluded domain, everyone's situation had become even more perilous. He Lu Lan's expression was grave and even Tai Bai Yunxing felt an intense suffocation. Flying masters were not omnipotent. With so many formless hands, the difficulty in evading them increased greatly. Moreover, the longer they spent, the more likely it was for them to make an error under such a strained state. This is turning worse. Tai Bai Yunxing was gloomy. What he was afraid of came. He made a mistake in the crucial time. His sole remaining escape path was blocked by 6 formless hands. At this moment of crisis, Tai Bai Yunxing gritted his teeth and directly crashed towards a 3-fingered formless hand. The formless hand grabbed him. Tai Bai Yunxing was immediately paralyzed. But this time period was extremely short and soon, the 3-fingered formless hand flew away with a clenched fist. Out of danger, Tai Bai Yunxing immediately burst out with his greatest speed and escaped through this gap. Tai Bai Yunxing's back was soaked with cold sweat from this thrilling situation. Even Tai Bai Yunxing was in such a predicament, let alone others. All the Gu masters met with calamity. At worst, not even one of their Gu worms remained. Without Gu worms, Gu masters' battle strength plunged down to the very bottom. And even if they had a lot of primeval essence, it would be of no use. Save me. A Gu master looked on with fright a True Inheritance that was flying right towards him. All his Gu worms were already seized by the formless hands. At this moment of life and death, he cried out for help while swinging his arms crazily to speed up his flight, but his movement speed was no faster than a snail in comparison to the true inheritance. The surrounding Gu masters heard his plea for help, but right now they had no way to help however much they wanted to. Thud. There was no unexpected event. The unlucky Gu master was directly crushed into meat paste by the true inheritance. This blue-colored true inheritance did not stop after crushing the Gu master and kept on flying away. On its way, formless hands kept on obstructing its path while it kept on evading. The wild newborn Gu will in the true inheritance also sensed the deadly threat of the heavenly tribulation formless hands, and did its best to escape. However, the will of Gu worms was not as intelligent as humans. The blue-colored true inheritance evaded several formless hands before it was finally grabbed by a five-fingered formless hand. The formless hand clenched its fist tightly but did not stop at the place. The true inheritance light lump speed was too fast, the formless hand was pulled in its inertia, except that the speed was greatly reduced. The five-fingered formless hand flew away with a Gu worm. But even more formless hands pounced down and covered the true inheritance light lump. One hand was not enough, another came followed by the next. Soon, 10 formless hands were tightly grabbing the true inheritance light lump. The true inheritance light lump continued to slow until it came to a stop. The formless hands suddenly separated and flew in all directions with clenched fists. There was nothing left at the spot, the blue-colored true inheritance was already robbed clean. At this moment, Fang Yuan snickered and flew towards the target he had his eyes on, and started attacking fiercely. A formless fist was broken by his attacks and revealed the Gu it was holding. Fang Yuan immediately reacted and grabbed it. This was a rank 5 mortal Gu, and after he refined it, he stored it in his pocket. Flash Bug Gu. He disappeared from the spot and suddenly appeared 300 steps away, right beside another formless fist. Bam bam bam. He punched heavily and broke the formless fist in 3 punches, leaving after grabbing the Gu. It was an immortal Gu. Almost at the very next moment, a formless hand pounced at him, and naturally it was in vain. Fang Yuan moved like lightning, occasionally soaring like a sparrow and occasionally piercing forward like an eagle. He was dodging the formless hands while also taking any chance to strike a fortune, grabbing many Gu worms of the true inheritance. However, the formless fists were very fast and the opportunity to destroy them was fleeting. The blue-colored true inheritance was a good opportunity Fang Yuan ran into, but he only had enough time to break 3 formless fists, obtaining 2 mortal Gu and an immortal Gu. While Fang Yuan was occupied with breaking the formless fist, the other formless fists had already flown far away and Fang Yuan was not able to chase after them. Suppress. Fang Yuan transferred his will into the Gu worms to temporarily suppress them. He did not have the time to refine these Gu worms, let alone study their uses. Suddenly, Fang Yuan's sight was covered with blue light. Maybe it was because Fang Yuan was too active and attention-drawing, 8 formless hands attacked him together. Fang Yuan's heart jumped and he quickly evaded. He moved and stopped at times, changing his directions madly, his vision kept on changing intensely, one moment he was above while the next he was below. He almost made himself go dizzy. He spent tremendous effort before he was able to get rid of the formless hands. He had just stabilized his breathing when suddenly, there was the sound of wind. A formless hand was flying right towards him. Fang Yuan was just about to dodge, but his pupils enlarged rapidly the next moment. This was a formless fist. He laughed heartily and flapped his 6 wings, directly punching towards the formless fist. He obtained a rank 5 Gu after breaking the formless fist. The Gu worm was vibrating in his hand and struggled intensely, attempting to escape. Fang Yuan sent a portion of his will inside, but was not able to suppress it. He immediately frowned as he realized this Gu was not a wild Gu, but a Gu master's Gu worm. Because the Gu worm had someone else's will, the difficulty in refining it was several times greater than refining wild Gu, and even temporarily suppressing it was difficult. Let go of my Gu. A familiar voice sounded by Fang Yuan's ears at this moment. Fang Yuan looked at the source of the voice, and immediately smiled. He saw He Lulan flying towards him hurriedly and furiously, his gaze fixed on the Gu in Fang Yuan's hand. Chapter 632, Coexistence of Pain and Joy. He Lulan poured incessant grievances in his heart. He had outstanding battle strength along with an extremely powerful strength path long-range killer move, it was just that they were not enough to cover his weakness in the movement aspect. More accurately speaking, He Lulan cultivated strength and dark path which were not impressive in movement ability. But in the present situation, only flying masters could barely survive. He Lulan's weakness was thus completely revealed under the pursuit of the formless hands. The formless hands wantonly seized the Gu worms in He Lulan's body. He had destroyed many formless hands and chased after many, but at the same time, new formless hands would appear to grab even more of his Gu worms. Right now, He Lulan was flying fiercely like a berserk bear, his expression was one of malevolence and anger. He knew Fang Yuan had big advantage in this situation, but he could not give up. The reason was that the Gu worm Fang Yuan had captured was, very unfortunately, He Lulan's vital Gu. The vital Gu was closely interlinked to the Gu master's life. Once it was destroyed, the Gu master would immediately suffer heavy injuries. By grabbing this Gu, it was akin to Fang Yuan controlling a huge weakness of He Lulan. Mentioning this vital Gu, it had gone through many difficulties as well, being seized by the formless hands many times while He Lulan seized it back again. Counting the number of times, this was already the 6th time this vital Gu had been seized. Only this time, an accident happened, it landed in Fang Yuan's hand. His vital Gu was with the enemy, this was a very serious situation and it needed to be retrieved. Fang Yuan's eyes shone with a cold light. He did not know the rank 5 Gu in his hand was He Lulan's vital Gu, but he could tell the huge importance of this Gu from He Lulan's behavior. Humph. You want to take back this Gu? Keep on dreaming. Fang Yuan moved the 6 wings on his back and rose up, flying far away. He Lulan had hunted down Fang Yuan again and again before, the hatred between them was already very deep. But this moment was not a good time to kill He Lulan. There were more and more formless hands, Fang Yuan was already feeling difficulty in dodging them. If he fought under this situation, he would surely have to pay an extremely disastrous price even if he succeeded. It was more so when He Lulan had great strength true martial physique, if he was forced into a corner and self-detonated, Fang Yuan would have to suffer the terrible consequences. Let's see how long he can continue chasing me. Fang Yuan snorted, and forcibly suppressed the restless Gu worm in his hand. Soon, he shook off He Lulan. While dodging the formless hands on the way, he sent a portion of his consciousness into his immortal aperture. The immortal aperture was growing without stop. Ever since Fang Yuan exited Tai by Yunsheng's immortal aperture, his immortal aperture had been continuously absorbing heaven and earth qi. Now, it was already over 2,600 square kilometers, the sky was orange and yellow while the earth was rugged with steep white stone mountain ranges that stood tall and lofty. The terrain of the immortal aperture was related to the Gu master's paths, accumulation, temperament and comprehension. This was the first time Fang Yuan became a strength path Gu immortal and he only roughly understood it now, only knowing the general situation. If he wanted to have a deeper understanding, he needed to research in the future. The time flow has reached 1:12 ratio. 1 day in the outside world is 12 days inside the immortal aperture. The growth rate is gradually slowing down. Fang Yuan assessed. By now, he had almost absorbed all the heaven and earth qi in true inheritance secluded domain. He was now waiting for the immortal aperture to stabilize completely, which was the most important. Once he possessed a Gu immortal's battle strength, everything would change. I will let you hold on to my Gu for the moment, I will get it back no matter what. He Lu Lan could only roar helplessly as he looked at Fang Yuan fly further and further away. He was obstructed by the formless hands when he chased and had lost many Gu worms. It was already very difficult for him to evade the formless hands, it was no wonder he would suffer the consequences when he chased after Fang Yuan under such conditions. He Lu Lan helplessly gave up. If he still persisted in chasing, it would definitely make Fang Yuan suspicious. And if Fang Yuan guessed the Gu was He Lu Lan's vital Gu, the situation would turn even worse. I can only rely on my connection to my vital Gu and slowly get near him while dodging the formless hands, then I will ambush this damned thief. He Lu Lan gritted his teeth till they made cracking noises, while thinking of all kinds of schemes. N/W novel chapt. RS are published on no/vel/bin.co/m. Formless hands could seize Gu worms but could not refine them. Once the formless hand was broken apart, the Gu worm would be released, upon which the Gu master would be able to immediately sense the Gu and use his will to recall them. Fang Yuan forcibly suppressed He Lu Lan's vital Gu, but had no time or energy to spare to refine it. Thus, He Lu Lan still had connection with the Gu worm, and had hope of turning the situation around. Time passed, the formless hands had completely gained control of the situation in True Inheritance secluded domain. Giant light blue hands could be seen everywhere like swarms of bees hovering around. Be it Gu masters or True Inheritance light lumps, they only had the choice of escaping. Spring-autumn cicada. Fang Yuan's mouth was dry as the pressure in him continued to increase. Following the growth of the immortal aperture, spring-autumn cicada continued to absorb the water of the river of time, causing the pressure in the first aperture to continue to increase. There were already many cracks on the first aperture's walls. To decrease the pressure on the first aperture as much as possible, Fang Yuan had already emptied out all the primeval essence in the aperture. He flew rapidly, using tens of movement Gu which had huge demand towards primeval essence. Fortunately, I had already planned and prepared long before this, and bought large numbers of beggar moths. But even so, I need to pay attention to my primeval essence. The consequences will be unimaginable if my primeval essence is completely exhausted. These beggar moths were Gu worms used to store primeval essence. They looked like moths, but their wings had round holes. These holes made the beggar moth look tattered, resembling a beggar's clothings. In truth, however, the more holes there were on the beggar moth's wings, the better. More holes meant the beggar moths could store higher rank primeval essence. In the mortal world, these beggar moths were limited in supply. But Fang Yuan possessed Hu immortal blessed land and was able to buy groups of beggar moths in treasure yellow heaven. Fang Yuan directly purchased a group, although there were not many rank 5 and rank 4 beggar moths, rank 3 and rank 2 were huge in numbers. Fang Yuan had close to 1,000 beggar moths and had brought almost all of them with him. Mortals could not buy them and would also find it hard to bear the expenses of raising Gu. But Fang Yuan had a Gu immortal's assets in Hu immortal blessed land, and it was easy for him to raise them. Not only beggar moths, he also had a lot of spare eagle rise Gu and other Gu. Fang Yuan would keep his eagle rise Gu after using them for a certain time and activate another eagle rise Gu. There were 6 wings on his back and it looked like he was using 3 eagle rise Gu, but in truth, he was using more than a dozen eagle rise Gu in turns. This was because of the heaven and earth chi. Using Gu worms under this situation would be met with the backlash from heaven and earth chi, the Gu might even perish if they were used for too long. Fang Yuan's immortal aperture was growing, as such he was the center of the gathering heaven and earth chi, causing the backlash force on him to be very high. Thus, by alternating the use of gu like Eagle Rise Gu, he could prolong their duration to the greatest limit. It was again thanks to having Hu immortal blessed land, having the help of a Gu immortal resources, that he could be such extravagant. The backlash of heaven and earth chi was also one of the barriers for a Gu master to advance to Gu immortal. When Tai Bai Yun Xing faced the tribulations in his ascension, his Gu worms perished in large numbers. If not for Fang Yuan's support, he would already have no more Gu worms to use after using them all up in facing chaotic lightning balls outside 88 Tru Yang building. If a Gu master was lucky enough to advance to a Gu immortal, all their mortal Gu would normally be destroyed. Advancing to a Gu immortal was extremely risky and there was a high price to be paid. In lots of cases, a newly advanced Gu immortal would have nothing on him. Almost all the Gu worms they accumulated before would be completely used up. 6-Arm Heavenly Zombie King. Fang Yuan suddenly turned into heavenly zombie form while flying and evading, his 6 wings soared and he raised his 8 arms. Bam! The next moment, he directly clashed against a formless fist. Fang Yuan did not feel any pain and directly shattered the formless fist, obtaining a Gu. Fang Yuan was overjoyed when he saw the Gu. This was the 3rd wild immortal Gu he had obtained after exiting Tai Bai Yun Xing's immortal aperture. He was unable to examine it closely, but he stored it in his pocket after suppressing it. Right now, he had the internal danger of spring-autumn cicada while on the outside, there was the formless hand disaster. He had to concentrate completely on flying, as well as pay attention to his primeval essence and the condition of his Gu worms. But he could not deny his plentiful harvests. Fang Yuan was deeply realizing what was called the coexistence of pain and joy. His flying master attainment was a great help to him in this situation. Where is Ma Hongyun? Fang Yuan stored the 3rd immortal Gu and looked around him with insatiable greed. Luck Path Supreme True Inheritance had all along been of extreme interest to him. Back then, Giant Sun Immortal Venerable had, to a large extent, relied on this to dominate the lands and become invincible in the world. Previously, Fang Yuan had no way to do anything about this Luck Path True Inheritance, but now borrowing the strength of formless hands, he could seize the Luck Path Gu worms. This was an extremely rare opportunity. However, even after searching all over whenever he had the chance, he did not see even the shadow of the Luck Path True Inheritance. Clearly, Luck Path True Inheritance was also moving around. The Supreme True Inheritance might be protecting Ma Hongyun and Zhao Lianyun, but it was only an acknowledgement of fortune rivaling heaven, and it was still being controlled by a wild will. It was an instinct for wild Gu worms to dodge heavenly tribulation and earthly calamity. It was a scene of chaos in the large True Inheritance secluded domain. There were formless hands everywhere, True Inheritance meteors, fleeing Gu masters or dazzling attacks towards the clenched formless fists, all these were obstructing Fang Yuan's vision. Fang Yuan also had to evade the formless hands and could not casually search. Both sides were on the move, thus it was actually normal for them to not bump into each other. Crack, crack. The sound of something cracking, like the cracking of egg shell, started to spread. The cracks in True Inheritance secluded domain were enlarging. It was only at one side first, but now the cracks had gradually spread to cover all sides. More and more giant light blue hands squeezed in through the cracks. Time passed, the losses to Fang Yuan's Gu worms were also becoming more severe. On one hand, because of the backlash from heaven and earth chi, especially the movement Gu worms, even after being used in turn, they had reached the limit and many perished. On the other hand, the quantity of formless hands had surpassed the point of qualitative change. Sometimes, many formless hands would appear together and block all escape paths. Fang Yuan was thus grabbed 2-3 times. But every time he was grabbed, he would intentionally choose the formless hand with less fingers, prioritizing his safety and letting his Gu worm be taken of his own accord. Chapter 633, Finally Becoming a Gu Immortal. As time continued to pass, Fang Yuan had no more opportunity to go shatter formless fists. He was busy running from the pursuit of the formless hands. Return my Gu. By some coincidence, He Lu Lan appeared in front of Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan sneered and activated Wind Flower Gu. A translucent wind flower appeared beside him and quickly changed direction, taking him with it. Whoosh! With the wind flower Gu's help, Fang Yuan's speed remained the same when he changed his direction, and was able to avoid He Lu Lan. He Lu Lan, however, was very happy. I am finally lucky for once. He actually ran that direction. Fang Yuan had not flown far away before his speed rapidly declined. This is. His expression changed as he sensed that he had fallen into a dark vortex. This was the trap He Lu Lan had set using one-time expenditure Gu, specially used to trap enemies. The formless hands were less than 100 steps away. Fang Yuan snorted and without losing his composure, used Flash Bug Gu. He disappeared from the spot and appeared 500 steps away the next moment. After getting out of his predicament, Fang Yuan immediately increased his speed, but not even a few breaths later, he once again fell into a dark vortex. He again used Flash Bug Gu to free himself. But following that, he fell in the third dark vortex again. True Inheritance Secluded Domain was originally a place filled with darkness, as such dark vortexes were extremely concealed here. Without someone running into them, they would remain still and there would be no way to sense them. But once someone ran into them, they would form a sinking force like one had stepped into a swamp or quicksand. You can't run away. I have placed countless traps all over the surrounding 100 li. He Lu Lan shouted while rapidly flying towards Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan was suffering the consequences of a lack of investigation. He shouted furiously, "You are seeking your own death, don't blame me." He activated 6-arm Heavenly Zombie King and forcefully freed himself from the vortex, charging straight towards He Lu Lan. He Lu Lan felt a chill before it turned into joy. He was not afraid of Fang Yuan attacking him, but afraid of Fang Yuan fleeing all the time and not give him the chance to fight. New and old hatred overlapped, both sides wanted nothing more than to kill each other. However, they had not even fought yet, when He Lu Lan suddenly changed his direction and fled. Shortly, Fang Yuan's expression also changed and retreated towards the back extremely quickly. Too horrifying. A large group of formless hands breezed down from above, their numbers were at least 500 to 600. The light blue radiance dyed the surrounding space into a scene of blue. The formless hand group divided into two, chasing after Fang Yuan and He Lu Lan. Fang Yuan was facing an unprecedented crisis. He did not dare to fly in between the formless hands. There were too many formless hands, even a light movement could easily seal all his paths. Fang Yuan could only fly forward swiftly, with the large group of giant light blue hands closely chasing him. "No, don't come here!" Yi Lui Sang shouted in panic. He was moving with 3 other Gu masters, and coordinating with each other, he was barely able to ensure the safety of his fire path immortal Gu. However, now he suddenly saw Fang Yuan flying towards them. And when he saw the group of formless hands behind Fang Yuan, Yi Lui Sang's heart nearly jumped out in shock. Fang Yuan not only increased his speed, he also quickly made his move. Long-range attacks sealed the best escape routes of Yi Lui Sang's group and also greatly slowed down their speed. Next, Fang Yuan turned a little and flew past them, continuing to fly swiftly. Yi Lui Sang's group was escaping with all their strength, but it was nowhere near enough. No! This unlucky Yi Lui tribe leader let out a miserable scream as hundreds of formless hands filled his vision. Like a burst of strong wind wreaking havoc or like locusts passing through the fields, the giant light blue hands plundered Yi Lui Sang's group and continued to chase after Fang Yuan. Yi Lui Sang's group stood on the spot with dazed expressions. There were too many formless hands, and in just a few breaths of time, all their goo worms were seized. In an instant, they had become completely penniless. Although they still had primeval essence remaining in their apertures, there was nothing to use them on. How will I report to Supreme Tribe Elder when I return? Yi Lui Sang's heart was filled with fear and bewilderment. His fire path Immortal Gu was lent to him by Yi Lui Tribe's Supreme Tribe Elder Yi Lui Lai to help him obtain victory in this imperial court contest. The value of the Immortal Gu was self-evident. Yi Lui Sang lost in the contest, but to preserve the Immortal Gu, he had to bear the disgrace of siding with He Lu Lan, who was also a super tribe leader like him. And now, because of Fang Yuan sending the disaster towards him, the fire path Immortal Gu he had protected with his heart and soul was gone. Fang Yuan flew rapidly before glancing behind him. He felt relieved when he saw the formless hands had decreased in number. This was the contribution of Yi Lui Sang's group. Fang Yuan saw hope in getting rid of this group of formless hands. That was to draw the disaster towards others. He had flying master attainment while others did not. That is. While fleeing, Fang Yuan finally discovered trace of Ma Hongyun. Luck Path's supreme true inheritance was shielding Ma Hongyun and Zhao Lianyun, while dodging and flying away from many formless hands chasing it. Of course, when compared to the group chasing Fang Yuan, it paled in comparison. Without the least bit of hesitation, Fang Yuan immediately flew towards Ma Hongyun. Visit novelbin.c. M for updates. Sensing an even greater danger, Luck Path True Inheritance Light Lump instinctively changed its direction. However, Fang Yuan chased it relentlessly, and with extremely deft movements, he was able to gradually get closer. Let us go, I beg you, please let us go. Ma Hongyun's pleading came from within Luck Path True Inheritance. Don't come over, don't come over. Zhao Lianyun was also shivering in fear. Fang Yuan's heart was tough like iron and cold as steel, how could he be swayed? His speed suddenly increased violently as he made a beautiful arc beside the Luck Path True Inheritance. The formless hand group was immediately attracted to the aura of Luck Path True Inheritance and flocked to it. We're finished. Both of Ma and Zhao's faces turned as they looked at the hundreds of formless hands blocking their escape routes, attacking like a storm. Ha ha ha, Luck Path Supreme True Inheritance. Fang Yuan made a full circle, before flying back. My immortal aperture has almost finished forming, this is truly wonderful, I can use it to store the Luck Path Immortal Gu. Fang Yuan's gaze burned looking at the formless hands shrouding the Luck Path True Inheritance. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Soon, many formless fists started flying away. Fang Yuan immediately started using all his methods to seize the Gu. 1, 2, 5, 6, the number soon crossed 10. Fang Yuan knew he would not be able to catch all Luck Path Gu worms, but he was satisfied at having such a harvest. Wait a moment, a six-fingered formless fist. Fang Yuan suddenly discovered a major target. The 6 fingers signified this fist was holding a rank 6 Luck Path Immortal Gu. Fang Yuan's eyes reddened and his breathing sped up as he used all his strength to chase the 6-fingered fist. He turned into 6-armed Heavenly Zombie King and directly pounced towards the fist. His 8 arms burst out with fist shadows as he rained down violent punches. The formless fist shattered and as expected, revealed a Luck Path Immortal Gu. Ha! Fang Yuan laughed heartily as he quickly grabbed it. However, right at this instant, a 6-fingered formless hand flew over and grabbed Fang Yuan. Its timing was impeccable as Fang Yuan's guard was slightly relaxed due to the happiness, the result was extreme joy turning into sorrow. Fang Yuan felt his mind go blank and cursed out, the time seemed to have stretched out extremely long at this moment. After 2 breaths, the 6-fingered formless fist flew away from him and Fang Yuan recovered the ability to move. Fang Yuan immediately unfolded his 6 wings and left the spot immediately. He hurriedly glanced behind him and saw 50 to 60 formless hands crashing into each other at the spot where he had just been before. If he had even the slightest hesitation. Fang Yuan's forehead was soaked with cold sweat. He then examined his body and the discovery caused him to turn gloomy. The Gu that was seized was not any of the immortal Gu he had seized or spring-autumn cicada, it was fixed immortal travel. This damned luck! Fang Yuan cursed. Fixed immortal travel was his primary method to leave this place and return to Hu immortal blessed land. He must get it back. Fang Yuan temporarily suppressed the luck path immortal Gu and stored it in his pocket, then he stared at that 6-fingered formless fist and gave chase. When one walks by the river, how could one's shoes not get wet? Fortunately, his immortal aperture finished stabilizing during the chase. Fang Yuan's risky attempt at advancing to Gu Immortal ended in success. At this moment he had become a true Strength Path Gu Immortal. His Strength Path Immortal aperture was very huge with about 3,500 square kilometers of area. The sky was orange-yellow and there were all sorts of lofty, tall and straight mountains on the ground made of white stones with not even a blade of grass on them. An invisible tributary of the River of Time was pulled into the immortal aperture blessed land, supporting the normal operations of this small world. In comparison to the outside world, the flow of time here was 1 to 16. The most important point was there were 22 green grape immortal essence beads. This is a medium-grade blessed land. Fang Yuan sighed. When a Gu master advanced to Gu Immortal, their immortal aperture could be classified into 3 grades. A small blessed land has a size of 2,000 square kilometers at the maximum, can draw in a small tributary of the River of Time and create over 10 beads of immortal essence, while being a land of few resources. Medium grade can have a size of 2,000 square kilometers to 4,000 square kilometers, draw in a slightly bigger tributary of the River of Time, create over 20 beads of immortal essence and has plentiful resources. High-grade blessed land can have a size of 4,000 square kilometers to 6,000 square kilometers, draw in a large tributary of the River of Time and create over 30 beads of immortal essence. There will be plenty of heaven and earth chi remaining which can mutually interact and refine a mortal Gu into a mortal Gu during a burst of inspiration. When Tai Bai Yun Sheng advanced to Gu Immortal, he refined 2 immortal Gu, no doubt, his was a high-grade blessed land. Fang Yuan's Strength Path Immortal Aperture, however, was a medium-grade blessed land. I might have much more human chi compared to Tai Bai Yun Sheng, but he received the help of human chi Gu and his human chi was able to greatly surpass mine. I received the protection of 88 true Yang building and giant sun's will, this was both an advantage and a disadvantage. Large amounts of heaven and earth chi were isolated outside and only a small part was able to seep into true inheritance secluded domain which was absorbed by me. Thoughts flashed Fang Yuan's mind like sparks. Giant Sun's will was after all forced to help Fang Yuan resist the heavenly tribulation and earthly calamity due to helplessness. It absolutely would not kindly allow the heaven and earth chi to enter true inheritance secluded domain which could provide Fang Yuan with more potential. Besides this, there is also another important factor, spring-autumn cicada. Spring-autumn cicada absorbed the water of the tributary of River of Time which was akin to cutting off the nourishment and greatly weakened the accomplishment of Strength Path Immortal Aperture. Thus, Fang Yuan's Strength Path Immortal Aperture's time flow had 1 to 16 ratio which was lower than normal standard. Chapter 634, Wind Veil of Assimilation. Fang Yuan felt no regret towards obtaining a medium-grade blessed land. This was for the best. Within the first aperture, spring-autumn cicada's pressure had already reached its limits, the first aperture's walls were full of cracks. If he continued, he might cause the aperture to explode. If it was a high-grade blessed land, it could refine an immortal Gu and create a heavenly tribulation and earthly calamity within the blessed land. Fang Yuan's predicament was extremely dangerous, he had both internal and external threats. If his immortal aperture had a heavenly tribulation and earthly calamity wreaking havoc inside, Fang Yuan would surely become too distracted. It would be fortunate if he only suffered a great loss, but most likely he would lose his life. Regardless, becoming a strength path Gu immortal means I have the ability to interfere in the battle now. Fang Yuan sighed deeply, throwing all of his Gu worms, be it mortal or immortal Gu, into his strength path immortal aperture. The immortal aperture had a huge space, it could easily hold immortal Gu. Next, Fang Yuan willed and used a bead of green grape immortal essence. Immediately afterwards, the green grape immortal essence spread and filled the entire blessed land, turning into almost limitless primeval essence. Fang Yuan heaved a sigh of relief. From this moment on, he no longer had to worry about primeval essence expenditure, he could use mortal Gu without any restraints anymore. This was the biggest difference between mortal and immortal. At the same time, after becoming an immortal, the heaven and earth chi were all consumed, thus there would no longer be any threat of a backlash. Fang Yuan's aura was surging, his eyes were shining with brilliance. His body shook slightly, and another pair of eagle wings grew on his back. Flying with 8 wings, Fang Yuan's speed became faster again, chasing after fixed immortal travel. Seeing that he was about to reach his target, Tai Bai Yunsheng called out for help behind him. "Junior brother, assist me," that hand took away my immortal Gu landscape as before. Fang Yuan turned around and saw a 6-fingered formless fist flying towards his left. Tai Bai Yunsheng was dragging the supreme true inheritance light lump as he chased after it desperately. Fang Yuan hesitated for a moment, this 6-fingered formless fist was right beside him, if he did not help, he would not be able to explain himself. He immediately activated the wind flower Gu, barely turning around. His speed was simply too fast, even the wind flower Gu in his immortal aperture could not take it, as many petals fell out. Fang Yuan caught up to the 6-fingered formless fist and smashed at it, breaking it open and rescuing landscape as before. Tai Bai Yunsheng was overjoyed upon seeing this. "Great, junior brother, if not for your help." Fang Yuan's pupils shrunk, shouting anxiously, "Senior brother, dodge." Too late. An 8-fingered formless hand flew over and grabbed onto Tai Bai Yunsheng. Tai Bai Yunsheng was immobilized, his face was full of shock and fear. During this time, hundreds of formless hands flew over and encircled Tai Bai Yunsheng. At the same time, large numbers of formless hands were flying over from far away. Damn it, not only was Tai Bai Yunsheng caught, he had the supreme true inheritance with him. This is bad, 88 True Yang building is going to be destroyed. I have to take back fixed immortal travel quickly. Fang Yuan did not dare to save him, his eyes flashed with a cold light as he placed the landscape as before Gu into his immortal aperture and turned around to leave. Fixed immortal travel Gu was the best method to escape, it was more important than any other immortal Gu right now in Fang Yuan's heart. Fang Yuan flew rapidly, about to reach the formless fist. After I take fixed immortal travel, I will leave, who cares about Tai Bai Yunsheng anymore? Fang Yuan's eyes shone with brilliance, he had made up his mind. True Inheritance secluded domain was at the deepest part of 88 True Yang building, and there were already so many formless hands here, not to mention the outside world. He had obtained enough benefits, and he had even successfully advanced to an immortal. If he continued staying here, he might lose his life. Fang Yuan had the intention to retreat already. But just when he was about to succeed, He Lu Lan blocked his path. "Don't think that I'll be afraid just because you became an immortal. Return my Gu worm to me now and I'll give way immediately." He Lu Lan screamed. "You are courting death." Fang Yuan stared furiously, he wanted to tear He Lu Lan into several pieces, but his logic dictated him to change directions and swerve around He Lu Lan, continuing his pursuit. He Lu Lan snickered, he was unable to catch up to Fang Yuan, but in terms of long-range methods, he had his ways to obstructing Fang Yuan in his chase. Fang Yuan was obstructed by He Lu Lan time and again, he had to change his direction. Is this worth it? Just return my gu to me and you'll be able to reach this formless fist. Don't forget, after the formless fist flies for a certain distance, it will vanish along with the gu worm. He Lu Lan urged. He was extremely anxious, his vital gu was in Fang Yuan's hands, but he had to control himself and mask his anxiety. Fang Yuan shouted out in anger, his expression still as water. There was no way he would return the gu worm to He Lu Lan. The more He Lu Lan cared about this gu, the more important this gu was to him. He Lu Lan was a huge enemy, even if he returned the gu worm. If he did not keep his promise and continued obstructing Fang Yuan, what then? Fang Yuan could only make detours and continue chasing after his target. Bam! Right at this moment, there was a huge sound. True Inheritance secluded domain completely broke apart, instantly exploding. Eye-piercing sunlight filled everyone's vision. At once, Fang Yuan and the others were caught off guard, their entire vision turned white. In such a situation, who would dare to shut their eyes completely? Even though their eyes were overflowing with tears due to the intensity, they had to open a slit. As the white light faded slowly from their blurred vision, everyone could see that they were floating in the air. Save us! Many gu masters cried out desperately for help. They were all unlucky people who had their gu worms taken away. Without gu worms, this rapid descent would cause them to die upon impact with the ground. Nobody lent a hand to help them. Those gu masters who were barely floating in the air could only care about themselves, as they looked around in shock. In the sky, there were thousands of formless hands, closely packed together. On the ground, smoke was rising and there was debris of 88 True Yang building everywhere. These broken walls and structures were disintegrating, turning back into gu worms. The number of gu worms was too many, each tile could split up into an ant's nest worth of gu worms. Oh my heavens! 88 True Yang building collapsed. Oh longevity heaven, why is this happening? Everyone was flustered and shocked, when suddenly a bright golden rainbow shot up in the sky. Leave behind the immortal gu. The remaining giant suns will had been storing energy for this moment, he finally made his move. The golden rainbow shot out like lightning, in the blink of an eye, it destroyed one formless fist and obtained the immortal gu within. Divert disaster gu. Giant suns will entered the gu and quickly activated it. Divert disaster gu shot out pillars of light and shone everywhere. The formless hands that were swept by the light pillars shrunk in size and their speed fell. Those formless hands that were hit by the light pillar disintegrated rapidly and the gu worms within were released. At once, giant suns will regain several immortal gu. Otherworldly demon. Luck path true inheritance. Giant suns will looked at the luck path true inheritance that was trapped by the formless hands, as well as Ma and Zhao who were inside the light lump. Without a trace of hesitation, he flew over with killing intent. My fixed immortal travel. Fang Yuan's heart sank to rock bottom. He lost his target. The formless fist that contained fixed immortal travel had gone missing, it had flew away with fixed immortal travel into the unknown. Fang Yuan had completely lost fixed immortal travel. Damn it! Fang Yuan controlled his heartache as he forced himself to calm down. Discover N. W chapt. RS. NN0. E. L. by. Outfit. Old ancestor is here, you have no way out now. Return my gu worm to me and I can still help you ask for mercy. He Lu Lan flew over, shouting. Fang Yuan's eyes flashed with cold light. He Lu Lan's words reminded him, his biggest threat now were the formless hands, followed by giant sun's will. Although the current giant sun's will was heavily damaged and was not even a tiny fraction of its original state, it was still not something Fang Yuan could take on. The will that giant sun immortal venerable left behind was too grand and majestic. Even though it had undergone such tremendous weakening, even though Fang Yuan was now a Gu immortal, he was still not its match. Most importantly, it was currently snatching immortal Gu all over the place. Once it activates the Gu, its battle strength would surge. Ordinary Gu worms need primeval essence or immortal essence to activate. No matter how powerful Giant Sun's will is, he is still a will and needs to use the rank 9 yellow apricot immortal essence that Giant Sun Immortal Venerable had left behind. Fang Yuan's gaze was like an eagle. He looked towards Giant Sun's will who was far away. He had just taken a look when a formless hand flew over. Fang Yuan flapped his wings, evading successfully. Damn it! He Lu Lan cursed ruthlessly. He had also suffered the attacks of 3 formless hands along the way. True Inheritance secluded domain was broken apart. The number of formless hands in the air increased by at least 10 times. These formless hands attacked, causing Fang Yuan and He Lu Lan to be dodging them with all their effort. They could not spare the energy to care about other things. Bam bam bam. Wind blades danced in the air, cutting apart several formless hands. The Gu that were caught earlier were released, while Giant Sun's will was like a golden dragon, pouncing on them. He had much of Giant Sun's immortal essence. He had the capability to instantly refine Gu worms when he got them. His battle strength surged and his aura was like a rainbow. Otherworldly Demon. Luck Path True Inheritance. Soon, Giant Sun's will found Ma and Zhao. They were surrounded by countless formless hands. The originally large True Inheritance light lump had shrunk by at least a third of its size. Giant Sun's will howled loudly, as several immortal Gu and hundreds of rank 5 mortal Gu were used together at once. The light of divert disaster shot straight. 1,000 wind blades danced in formation. A bright red fire crow spread its wings and flew while screeching. All sorts of attacks surrounded the luck path True Inheritance like the falling petals of a flower. Once any formless hands flew out, they would be instantly destroyed, and the Gu worm within would be taken by Giant Sun's will. Oh no, this luck path True Inheritance originally belonged to Giant Sun Immortal Venerable. If Giant Sun's will obtains it, it would truly be a tiger gaining wings, or a flood dragon entering the sea. Fang Yuan flew rapidly. Taking a look at this scene, his heart turned heavy. He looked around, but realized that to leave this place, he needed the Stargate Gu. Imperial Court Blessed Land is on the brink of destruction. The outer fringe of the Blessed Land is already blowing with winds of assimilation, forming a huge circular wind veil. This wind has tremendous force. Even if I am a Gu immortal, I cannot resist it. I cannot force my way out. Chapter 635, Important Decision. Imperial Court Blessed Land was the #1 blessed land of Northern Plains. It had deep foundations and tremendous fortune. Despite this, after Fang Yuan entered it, first, there was the contest of the land spirit, Frost Jade Peacock, and Giant Sun's will. Next, Fang Yuan and Tai Bai Yunxing underwent immortal ascension and took in the heaven and earth chi of the blessed land. Furthermore, there was the once-in-10 years blizzard ravaging the blessed land, and it even fused with Tai Bai Yunxing and Fang Yuan's tribulations to form a terrifying heavenly tribulation. Frost Jade Peacock was able to endure it for so long. That was really quite a miracle already. Imperial Court Blessed Land's destruction was a foregone conclusion. Now that the wind veil was formed, Imperial Court Blessed Land was surrounded like a sphere, and the walls of the sphere were extremely thick, at least hundreds of meters. Even if the formless hands flew there, they would be crushed into bits, being assimilated into wind and lead to growing the strength of the winds of assimilation. Even with Flash Bug Gu, Fang Yuan could not get through it. However, this wind veil also formed an isolation barrier and prevented outside forces from intervening. At this moment, thousands of meters above the ground, in the sky, Three Gu immortals looked down at the grand winds of assimilation that was like a giant dark green bowl inverted on the ground with a grim expression. The wind veil's surface was very tranquil, but no one dared to underestimate the power of the winds of assimilation. Imperial Court Blessed Land's destruction is unavoidable. What happened inside? How did it become like this? One of the Gu immortals, an elderly man, looked with a furious gaze as his brows were tightly folded. 88 Truyang Building, Imperial Court Blessed Land, they were the arrangement of giant sun immortal venerable to benefit his descendants. As descendants with Huang Jin bloodline, they had already considered Imperial Court Blessed Land as their territory since long ago. But now, the domain that held great treasures had been destroyed. These righteous path Gu immortals of Northern Plains super tribes were like dormant volcanoes turning active. Very evidently, this is a huge scheme. Our investigations earlier have shown that the most suspicious person is that Wolf King Chang Shan. We have enough evidence to conclude that this person is an impersonator. The real Chang Shan had died long ago. Another young Gu immortal said solemnly. After pausing for a while, he continued, obviously, not just Chang Shan, but other than him, Tai Bai Yun Sheng, Bian Si Xian and the others are also suspicious. This scheme is very deep, it involves the forces of Central Continent. According to what we've learnt, there are at least 3 of the ancient sects in Central Continent plotting against the 88 Truyang Building for the last 100 years. Central Continent Gu Immortals' secret plot expended a lot of their effort and resources to create the loopholes and setups. In the end, Fang Yuan made use of these arrangements in advance. All of their hard work had gone to the benefit of someone else. Northern Plains Gu immortals were not to be trifled with. Imperial Court Blessed Land, 88 Truyang Building, they were the spiritual symbols of Northern Plains, they were extremely important. The moment something happened to Imperial Court Blessed Land and the happenings inside were exposed to the outside world, Northern Plains forces all paid close attention to it. Unfortunately, they were all outside, and the situation had advanced too quickly. It was already too late by the time they wanted to save Imperial Court Blessed Land. Sigh. The leader of the Gu immortals sighed deeply. He was good-looking with red lips and white teeth, but for some reason, he had the appearance of a child. The aura he was emitting was extremely powerful. He was subtly the leader of the 3. The most important thing now is not to investigate these matters, but to consider the ways to salvage this situation. 88 Truyang Building was the arrangement of giant sun immortal venerable, a rank 8 immortal Gu house. It is profound and mysterious, its heavenly power is not something we can understand. Although the winds of assimilation this time are fierce, forming a wind veil, it might not be able to destroy 88 Truyang Building. We will stay here and look for an opportunity to help, while being careful of any unexpected situations. The child Gu immortal's words made the elderly man and the young man Gu immortal breathe in deeply. Lord Tongzu, you are absolutely right. Our Chanyu tribe has the immortal killer move, Winged Blade. As long as we activate it together, we will be able to forcefully break the wind veil of assimilation. The young man Gu immortal said this, unable to conceal his pride. The winds of assimilation is not to be underestimated. Even with Winged Blade, we only have one chance to attack. I have made my calculations. The injury that we cause on this wind veil of assimilation would recover in only 8 breaths of time. The elderly man was a wisdom path Gu immortal. He could make deductions and predictions. The leader of the 3, Chanyu Tongzu, nodded slightly. Right now, He tribe, Yi Lui tribe, Dongfang tribe and others are surrounding the wind veil. All these righteous path super tribes have sent their Gu immortals. There is also the number 1 demonic path force Snowy Mountain. They sent 6 Gu immortals, attempting to take advantage of the situation. Don't underestimate them. We have our trump cards, so do they. When we use the Winged Blade, we have to prevent them from taking advantage of us. The luck path true inheritance cannot fall in the hands of the otherworldly demon. All these are mine, mine. Giant sons will shouted loudly. his voice reverberated over the entire battlefield. He turned into a golden dragon, taking form at will. Sometimes, 17 to 18 small dragons were created, while at the next moment, they combined into a giant dragon. He carried Giant Sun's immortal essence, using it without holding back. More than 10 immortal Gu were embedded on the dragon's body, there were 2 on its dragon horns, 1 in each of its eyes, and 6 to 7 in its scales. Blazing flames, divert disaster light beam, frost energy, all sorts of attacks were unleashed unceasingly. At this point, Giant Sun's will could finally use his full strength. Giant Sun's will had suppressed his anger for too long, he released all of it at this moment. First, he had to get rid of the otherworldly demon, and because of the luck path true inheritance's importance, Giant Sun's will first surrounded Ma and Zhao. Large numbers of formless hands covered the luck path true inheritance tightly, at times, formless fists that captured luck path Gu worms flew out. Giant Sun's will was like a golden dragon, surrounding the luck path true inheritance and coiling around it, destroying all of the formless fists that came out. There were many formless fists, even Giant Sun's will could only choose some and attack those, trying to free more immortal Gu to raise his battle strength. But near the giant will dragon, there were also large numbers of formless hands. When Giant Sun's will snatches these Gu worms back, the formless hands would steal them again. During this contest, the two were fighting intensely and occupied the sky. Below this battle, the remaining surviving Gu masters were fighting with a smaller number of formless hands. Even though Giant Sun's will attracted most of the formless hands, the Gu masters were not having an easier time. With the destruction of true inheritance secluded domain, the Gu masters were completely exposed and out in the open, they were attacked by even more formless hands. The formless hands were almost immune to all attacks, they flew in the sky and pierced through rocks, nothing could obstruct them. Only after stealing a Gu worm would they form into a fist and be susceptible to attacks. But the speed of the formless fists was very fast, not all Gu masters could chase after them and destroy them successfully. Fang Yuan, He Lu Lan, and the others were a minority, they were geniuses among geniuses. Old ancestor, please help, ah! A shrill scream could suddenly be heard. Everyone could not help but raise their heads and look. Only to see that a Gu master from a super tribe, one who bears a pure bloodline, was left with no other choice after being chased by the formless hands and flew into the sky to seek help from Giant Sun's will. But in the end, he was the first to be slaughtered by Giant Sun's will after he activated the immortal Gu to attack. Such might! He Lu Lan raised his head and looked, even with his great strength true martial physique, he did not dare to get close to Giant Sun's will. Giant Sun's will had completely erupted, his attacks were fierce and carried tremendous might. His entire mind was on the luck path true inheritance, while competing with the formless hands, he had no energy to care about Giant Sun's bloodline descendants. So painful. At this moment, Yi Lui Sang drew in a breath of cold air, crawling up from the ground. The Gu worms on his entire body were stolen, he had fallen from the sky. Thankfully, his body was once tempered using Gu worms, thus he only suffered bone fractures while keeping his life. Looking at this unlucky person who died, he suddenly felt extremely glad. At least, compared to this unlucky guy, he was still alive. Being alive was more important than anything. Fang Yuan could feel an immense mental pressure. Damn it! He gritted his teeth in annoyance, he wanted to leave but had no way to break out of this predicament. Thankfully, Giant Sun's will did not target me at the start, but instead went after that otherworldly demon Zhao Lianyun, while also wanting to protect the luck path true inheritance. Fang Yuan was very clear in his heart, once Giant Sun's will gets rid of this problem, he would not let him off. By then, he would be like a sheep standing near a tiger, or a rabbit near a python. Giant Sun's will alone cannot activate so many immortal Gu. Even though I became a Gu immortal, if we fought head-on, I would still not be Giant Sun's will's match. That is unless I cut away his connection with Giant Sun's immortal essence. Fang Yuan's mind was very sharp. But unfortunately, there were too many formless hands, he had to exert himself in dealing with them. Other than Giant Sun's will, he was the one with the most immortal Gu, their aura was attracting the attack of many formless hands. At the same time, He Lu Lan's continuous attacks were also quite a problem. He had the great strength true martial physique of the 10 extreme physiques, a true child of heaven, he could be thought of as the matured version of Bai Ning Bing. Be it his battle capabilities or foundation and accumulation, they were very outstanding. He had heaven-defying battle strength, even Tai Bai Yun Sheng was not his match, the power of his self-detonation could slay an immortal. After being obstructed once again by He Lu Lan, Fang Yuan's gaze towards him became more ominous. At the same time, Fang Yuan thought to himself, this He Lu Lan has an absurd number of Gu worms. He had many of his Gu worms taken away, yet he still has so many remaining. EAD New Chapt. RS on no/VE/L. In.com. There was a reason for this, of course. He Lu Lan's sole purpose was to enter 88 True Yang Building and obtain a Strength Path Immortal Gu, before attempting his immortal ascension in Imperial Court Blessed Land. Thus, he made ample preparation, especially with his father's help, he accumulated many Gu worms. He considered the backlash of the heaven and earth chi during his immortal ascension which would lead to the death of Gu worms, thus he prepared a lot of Gu worms, more than what anyone could imagine. Junior brother, save me. After dodging for a while, Fang Yuan heard Tai Bai Yun Sheng's cry for help. It turns out, Tai Bai Yun Sheng was trapped by the formless hands, floating in the air as he desperately defended himself. Eventually, his Gu worms were all taken away. After losing the support of his Gu worms, even as a Gu immortal, he started falling towards the ground. Tai Bai Yun Sheng was his only alliance mate, he could not abandon him yet. Fang Yuan immediately made a turn and took a risk to save him. But who knew that during that period, Tai Bai Yun Sheng's anxious shout could be heard, "Quick, junior brother, take back my immortal Gu man as before." Fang Yuan's heart jumped, seeing that a six-fingered formless fist was flying out. If at this moment, Fang Yuan chooses to save Tai Bai Yun Sheng, then he would lose the best opportunity to take back man as before immortal Gu. Most likely, after he saves Tai Bai Yun Sheng, man as before would be transported away by formless fist. To save Tai Bai Yun Sheng, or to take back the immortal Gu man as before. At this moment, Fang Yuan had to make an important decision. Chapter 636, Shocking Change. To save Tai Bai Yun Sheng, or take back man as before. At this instant, Fang Yuan hesitated. Man as before, this Gu was extremely famous even though it was a mortal Gu. Now that it had become an immortal Gu, its ability was even greater. According to what Tai Bai Yun Sheng had said earlier, when it was a mortal Gu, it could turn a Gu master's condition back to a state in the past. After becoming an immortal Gu, it could not only affect others but even himself. This himself naturally meant Tai Bai Yun Sheng. Tai Bai Yun Sheng was a Gu immortal, it was not hard to deduce that the immortal Gu man as before could affect Gu immortals as well. As a Gu worm that can heal a Gu immortal, the value of man as before need not be mentioned. In fact, its value far surpassed ordinary immortal Gu. Thus, Tai Bai Yun Sheng was so anxious, forgetting his own predicament and reminding Fang Yuan to take back man as before. But Tai Bai Yun Sheng's words were merely out of anxiety, he said it without truly considering the consequences. In the case that Fang Yuan really abandoned him and attempted to retrieve man as before immortal Gu, Tai Bai Yun Sheng would be in great danger. Even though the essence of a Gu master's life undergoes a qualitative change when becoming a Gu immortal, if he fell from such a high altitude, even if Tai Bai Yun Sheng survived, he would be gravely injured. And don't forget that there were many other Gu masters who were remaining on the ground. Taking back man as before would use up a lot of time. Even if I retrieve man as before, if this causes a rift between me and Tai Bai Yunsheng, what should I do then? Tai Bai Yunsheng shouted out of anxiety. Once he was in grave danger and his life was at risk, he would immediately realize, compared to the immortal Gu, his life was more important. If at that moment, he saw his junior brother chasing the immortal Gu and giving up on saving himself, how would he think? A person's heart is very fickle and ever-changing. Even though this sentence was said by Tai Bai Yunsheng himself, when thinking of the circumstances and seeing things from another's shoes, he would feel doubt and suspicion. So be it if I still had fixed immortal travel, but now that I have lost it, and the wind veil of assimilation is still contracting, isolating us from the outside world, I will need to use a stargate to leave this place and connect it to Hu immortal blessed land. Fong Yuan was facing great difficulty. To open the stargate, he would need to use Starlight Firefly Gu. The formless hands were flying about and ravaging the place, they were an unstoppable force. Once the Starlight Firefly Gu appeared, the formless hands would show up like flies. Even as a Gu immortal, Fong Yuan had no confidence in protecting them from the formless hands. But now that the wind veil of assimilation has been formed, there is no more heaven and earth chi, even though there are a lot of formless hands, no new ones will appear. Furthermore, with 88 true yang building breaking apart and dissolving into different Gu worms that are flying around. The formless hands had no energy source, they could not be sustained. Fong Yuan was a veteran demonic path cultivator with 500 years of experience, he naturally had good insight. Once the formless hands weaken, giant suns would become the strongest force in this battlefield. By then, after he gets rid of Ma and Zhao, retrieving the luck path true inheritance, he would come after me. By then, giant suns would have giant suns immortal essence and many immortal Gu, he would truly be the strongest foe. As the weaker party, Fong Yuan had to choose to cooperate against this strong foe, to resist the enemy with numbers. In this entire battlefield, Tai Bai Yunsheng was the only suitable person. Even though he was a healing Gu immortal, he was still a Gu immortal. Even though his Gu worms were all stolen, Fong Yuan could lend him some. Moreover, He Lu Lan and the other blood-related descendants were all Giant Sun's will's natural allies. No matter how well Fong Yuan could speak, in such a short time and in such a situation, they would not switch sides. After thinking so deeply, in reality, merely a short moment passed. Fong Yuan moved like lightning, without hesitation, he flew towards Tai Bai Yunsheng who was falling. Junior brother, you, sigh. Seeing Fong Yuan make such a choice, Tai Bai Yunsheng who had calmed down looked with shining eyes, he was touched and wanted to say something, but eventually ended up sighing. Along the way, many formless hands were obstructing them, but Fong Yuan twisted left and right, he was agile like a bird, he quickly shortened the distance between him and Tai Bai Yunsheng. But right at this moment, the figure of a person suddenly appeared around Tai Bai Yunsheng. Old fool, you have finally fallen into my hands. The figure quickly turned solid as He Lu Lan grabbed Tai Bai Yunsheng by the collar, capturing him. Although Tai Bai Yunsheng was a Gu immortal, he had no Gu worms on him, it was simply too easy for He Lu Lan. He Lu Lan quickly activated his Gu worm, sealing Tai Bai Yunsheng's 4 limbs and making him faint. Seeing the captive in his hands, He Lu Lan was overjoyed. He was able to capture Tai Bai Yunsheng under such chaotic circumstances mostly due to luck. But the result was already a success. Now He Lu Lan's mind was full of ways to threaten Fong Yuan, to use this captive to take back his vital Gu. But he had just raised his head and had yet to speak, before he saw Fong Yuan's body turning around and flying high up into the air. He Lu Lan captured Tai Bai Yunsheng, it is obviously because he wants to threaten me and ask for that Gu worm. Fong Yuan had guessed He Lu Lan's intention at the first moment. His heart sank, but he was still as calm as ever. Since He Lulan had such an objective, he would not cause harm to Tai Bai Yunsheng's life. That means, Tai Bai Yunsheng was safe for the time being. In that case, the most important thing for Fang Yuan now was to retrieve the immortal Gu man as before. He dodged left and right, avoiding the formless hand's attacks. His 8 wings flapped intensely as Windflower Gu and Flash Bug Gu were used in turns. Eventually, after 15 minutes, after exerting all of his strength, with great difficulty he smashed the formless fist and took back the man as before immortal Gu. Because he obtained Tai Bai Yunsheng's trust, man as before immortal Gu did not struggle in Fang Yuan's hands. Fang Yuan did not use his will to suppress it, he placed it into the strength path immortal aperture. Your senior brother's life is in my hands, quickly return my Gu worm. At this point, He Lulan finally caught up and had the chance to issue a threat. He was full of sweat, chasing Fang Yuan was not easy. Especially when his movement speed was insufficient, and he still had to carry Tai Bai Yunsheng. Read latest ch. He thought he understood Fang Yuan's objectives, he was very confident in himself. Just as he said that, a formless hand flew over to him, He Lulan did not dare to resist it head-on and had to dodge. This way, the imposing aura that he had tried to create was immediately weakened. Fang Yuan's figure was like a lightning shadow, moving around the formless hands easily. When he got close to He Lu Lan, he was expressionless, but he was sighing over the inconvenience in his heart. Fang Yuan knew that he could not resist Giant Sun's will alone, he needed Tai Bai Yunsheng's help. But now that Tai Bai Yunsheng was a captive, Fang Yuan was quite restricted. Although he had man as before immortal Gu, he was not given permission by Tai Bai Yunsheng to use the Gu. If he could use it, when He Lu Lan kills the captive and Tai Bai Yunsheng dies, Fang Yuan could revive Tai Bai Yunsheng using man as before. But there was a major problem here. Using immortal Gu man as before required immortal essence. To revive a mortal, there was no issue. But to revive an immortal, the immortal essence expenditure would surely be huge. Fang Yuan only had 22 beads of green grape immortal essence. He used up one in diffusing it into endless primeval essence, thus he only had 21 left. This was his greatest assurance in fighting Giant Sun's will. But to revive Tai Bai Yunsheng, he would need to use at least 10 green grape immortal essence. Unless there was no choice, Fang Yuan did not want to do that. He Lu Lan was truly a formidable character, it was no fluke that he was the person who became the victor of the imperial court contest. He had overwhelming talent and ability, once an opportunity appeared, he knew how to grab onto it. Don't tell me, I really have to return his Gu worm. Once that thought appeared, Fang Yuan suppressed it. He Lu Lan was so anxious about that Gu, it was surely something extraordinary. Fang Yuan was not willing to return it just like that. Most importantly, He Lu Lan was not trustworthy. As time passed, Giant Sun's will and the formless hands' battle intensified. Giant Sun's will originated from Giant Sun Immortal Venerable, he was very ruthless and wise, now that his original strength could be displayed fully, he showed off a matchless disposition. He drew support from the Luck Path True Inheritance Light Lump, and while fighting against the formless hands, he took back control of the one and only copy of the Luck Path True Inheritance. After so long, the Luck Path True Inheritance Light Lump was still quite intact. There were simply too many Gu worms inside this true inheritance, it was shocking. In just this short while, 6 Luck Path Immortal Gu were already taken by the formless hands. No wonder it was the one and only copy. Immortal Gu were unique, even for Giant Sun Immortal Venerable, he exerted all his efforts and could only elevate the true inheritance to this extent. 3 of the 6 immortal Gu were retrieved by Giant Sun's will when he broke the formless fists. Giant Sun's will could only watch as the other 3 were taken away by the formless fists. Damn it! Too hateful. Giant Sun's will got more furious as he fought, he had already hated Zhao Lianyun to the depths of his soul, now he no longer cared about Ma Hongyun's life. I want to see how long this Luck Path True Inheritance can protect you for. Giant Sun's will gritted his teeth. If not for him wanting to protect the Luck Path True Inheritance and being unable to attack all out, he would have destroyed this light lump and killed Ma and Zhao. Ma and Zhao hugged each other, towards this situation, there was nothing they could do but to await death. The great pressure was a huge turmoil on their hearts, their feelings for each other rapidly grew. But this was useless. The frost jade peacock that recognized them as its master had already died. The size of the Luck Path True Inheritance Light Lump was less than a third of what it had been originally. Seeing that death was approaching closer and closer, Ma and Zhao lost any hopes of surviving. Fang Yuan and He Lu Lan were at a stalemate, they were bargaining. Both sides were very distrustful of each other, this talk was progressing very slowly. Clang! Right at this moment, from outside the wind veil, there was the sound of a blade. The sound of the blade was crisp and sharp, it reverberated in everyone's ears. What? This is. Everyone raised their heads, they were attracted by this strange event, even the giant dragon of Giant Sun's will stopped its attacks. Only to see that above them, on the wind veil of assimilation, there was a huge opening created by a blade. Everyone could see the outside sky of northern plains through the opening caused by the blade. In the sky, 3 Gu immortals from Chanyu tribe were breathing roughly. This was the immortal killer move that they activated, Winged Blade. Around them, there were a dozen or so Gu immortals. It turns out that when the 3 of them were colluding not too long ago, other righteous path Gu immortals approached them. Because He tribe's Gu immortals were very sincere and put in a lot of effort, they came to an agreement quickly and thus chose to attack earlier than expected. With the blade opening, the inside and outside world were connected. This was a huge influence to anyone in the battlefield. The ones who reacted faster than Fang Yuan and the other humans were the Gu worms. 88 Truyang building was an ownerless object. After being destroyed by the heavenly tribulations and earthly calamities, the walls collapsed and turned into large number of wild Gu worms. At this crucial moment, using their instincts, these Gu worms flew into the air, towards the opening. During the process, formless hands were capturing them all over the place. This is the best chance to charge through the wind veil and escape from this dangerous place. The Gu master's eyes were glowing. Ah! So many Gu worms, these are all formed from 88 Truyang building. Northern Plains Gu immortals watched with burning and shining eyes. Chapter 637, Huge Shocking Change. Originally, within the wind veil of assimilation, the Gu worms were lifeless. Now, a huge opening was cut into the wind veil of assimilation, opening a link outside to northern plains. The Gu worms all went into a frenzy, frantically rushing towards the opening. Formless hands arrived, attempting to grab them along the way. Nearly half of the Gu worms were captured by the formless hands, and carried off by the formless fists, vanishing into thin air. Despite this, the majority of the Gu worms managed to rush out of the opening, escaping this dangerous area surrounded by the wind veil of assimilation, and arriving in the outside world of northern plains. Come to me, be mine. So many Gu worms, that is an immortal Gu. Stop at once. Do not fight, distribute the Gu according to our prior arrangement, no one should act recklessly. The northern plains Gu immortals saw a cluster of Gu worms, like an unceasing torrent of water rushing forth. They were already in a state of shocked ecstasy. They struck at once, repeatedly shouting, competing against each other, and displaying all kinds of methods. Fang Yuan raised his head to look, and saw a scene of Gu immortals madly fighting over Gu worms. There are more than 20 Gu immortals. They probably used the immortal killer move Winged Blade. This killer move is a first-class attacking method of northern plains. During the battle of the 5 regions in the future, many central continent Gu immortals died from it. His expression was grim, his eyes were flickering with cold light, the memories of his previous life was still vivid within his mind. Winds of assimilation, the number 1 wind in the world, they were able to assimilate all things. There are few methods capable of restraining it. But the immortal killer move Winged Blade had peerless might. It was a rare method that was even able to cleave open the wind veil of assimilation. Naturally, this is also because the wind veil of assimilation had not formed for a long time. The wind walls are still not too thick. Given a longer period of time, even the winged blade will be unable to damage it. Winds of assimilation, they were a wind that blew when immortal apertures faced destruction. Once the wind gained momentum, and there was enough wind blowing, even rank 8 Gu immortals would struggle to resist it. As for rank 9 Gu immortals, they were the rulers of the world, they were invincible beings. No matter how strong the winds of assimilation became, it could do nothing to them. This shocking change was out of Fang Yuan's expectations. To him, this was not a method of escaping. He had caused harm to giant Sun's will and caused the collapse of 88 Truyang building. He was the culprit behind Imperial Court Blessed Land's destruction. Once he went outside, and got caught by the angry Northern Plains Gu immortals, he would end up facing a terrible fate. By then, even death would be a luxury. He placed his attention on He Lulan now. If He Lulan got distracted now, Fang Yuan would launch a sneak attack and take back Tai by Yunsheng. But He Lu Lan's eyes were fixed on Fang Yuan without a single bit of distraction. His objective this time was to obtain a strength path immortal Gu and become a Gu immortal. But he did not excel in movement and could not break the formless fists. However, he had made an agreement with Giant Sun's will. As long as he helped him, Giant Sun's will would give him a strength path immortal Gu as a reward. This was also the sole reason why He Lu Lan had followed Giant Sun's will since the battle began. This fellow. Fang Yuan had no opportunity at all, he could only grit his teeth. Right at this moment, there was a transmission from above the wind veil, but the voice was choppy. He Lu Lan, my son, father is here, to bring you back. He Lu Lan's own father, the supreme tribe elder of Northern Plains super tribe, He tribe, a legendary figure in Northern Plains who was also the famous main character of the love story, Su Xian's Night Elopement, He Cheng. He was rank 7 and cultivated dark path, his eyes were like ink while his face was like jade, he had a handsome appearance and looked carefree. At this moment, he was floating in the air, keeping some Gu worms while calling out He Lu Lan's name with much worry. Don't worry, father, has already found the strength path immortal Gu for you. But He Lu Lan snorted coldly when he heard his father's call. He pretended he did not hear He Cheng's words, instead it triggered his anger as his expression turned into one of hatred. Filled with the deep intent of revenge, he growled at Fang Yuan, my patience is running out, do you still want your senior brother's life? Quickly hand over my Gu worm to me, otherwise I will kill him. He obviously had to save Tai by Yunsheng, this was the only useful reinforcement that Fang Yuan could use to resist Giant Sun's will. R. Ad lat. STCH. Ters on N. /v/ L. B. I. Dot. C. M. Thus, Fang Yuan shouted, I can give the Gu to you, but you must wake my senior brother up first and let him run 1,000 steps away from here. His suggestion was immediately denied by He Lu Lan, impossible. You have to pass the Gu to me first, otherwise I will crush his skull directly. Both sides did not trust each other. Fang Yuan wanted He Lu Lan to release Tai by Yunsheng, but He Lu Lan was afraid of Fang Yuan's movement speed. He Lu Lan wanted Fang Yuan to return the Gu first, but Fang Yuan was afraid of He Lu Lan playing tricks. Of course, there was the most common way to settle this. That was for both parties to act at the same time, releasing Tai by Yunsheng and the Gu together. But in this environment, where formless hands were flying around everywhere, who would dare to let their Gu worms fly around? It was not that Fang Yuan did not want to save Tai by Yunsheng, but the discussion was always stuck at this stage. Fang Yuan raised his head to look, and the scene was making his heart sink, oh no. The formless hands disappear after capturing Gu worms. The formless hands will continue to decrease in number, and soon, Giant Sun's will would gain control of the situation. Not only was He Lu Lan anxious, Fang Yuan was also starting to become anxious. Giant Sun's will was a special will, exterminating the otherworldly demon was his top priority. This objective ruled above his desire to live. The dragon made of will roared, it ignored the passage above its head as it coiled around the luck path true inheritance. The remaining luck path Gu worms were the true inheritance's core. Giant Sun's will did not dare to be careless. Are we going to die? Seeing the luck path true inheritance light lump reduced to a thin layer, Ma Hongyun and Zhao Lianyun felt that all hope was lost. But right at this moment, the true inheritance light lump burst out with a dazzling light, the light was so strong it could blind everyone's vision. With a whoosh, the true inheritance light lump carried Ma Hongyun and Zhao Lianyun, flying up and turning into a rainbow of light, charging towards the opening in the wind veil. The luck path true inheritance was governed by the will of a wild Gu, it had a very strong instinct for survival. Don't even think about it. The dragon of giant sons will shouted furiously, without hesitation, it gave chase immediately. The true inheritance light lump was really fast, giant sons will could not catch up to it. Seeing that true inheritance light lump was about to get out of the wind veil of assimilation and escape into northern plains, giant sons will finally let go of his reservations and set his mind on exterminating the otherworldly demon Zhao Lian Yun. This was the primary objective that Giant Sun Immortal Venerable had given to the special will. When one could not get the best of both worlds, Giant Suns will had no choice but to discard one to achieve the other objective. Giant Sun's immortal essence was injected into all the immortal Gu, as the dragon of will shined with a dozen spots of lights. In 3 breaths of time, the light expanded rapidly, ready to attack. The will dragon's aura surged. As it readied itself, a shockingly powerful attack was about to be launched. But, right at this moment, from among the group of goo worms, another true inheritance light lump appeared suddenly. This true inheritance light lump was about the size of an adult, it was a supreme true inheritance. This supreme true inheritance gave off a thin layer of light. This light was not dazzling in brightness alone, but it kept changing into different colors. The light was also very dense, and it covered a huge area, forming a giant halo. The supreme true inheritance along with the halo crashed fiercely into the dragon of giant sun's will. Crack crack crack. Under the halo's effect, giant suns will rapidly expanded and exploded, leaving behind the sound of firecrackers. The giant halo with the supreme true inheritance as its center attacked the dragon of giant sun's will, and attempted to cut the dragon into 2 at its waist. Giant sun's will howled, falling into extreme anger and shock. It had broken into 2, originally the dozen immortal Gu were ready to attack, but their lethal attacks had been cancelled already. Rank 9 Wisdom Gu. Fang Yuan's expression was unchanging, but his heart jumped. From the appearance of this supreme true inheritance, its true identity had been exposed. Within the true inheritance secluded domain, there were only the supreme true inheritances. One was 88 True Yang building itself, it had already been broken up by the formless hands. This was also why 88 True Yang building had collapsed completely and split back into goo worms. The other was the Luck Path True Inheritance, it had once fueled Giant Sun Immortal Venerable's glorious success. Right now, it was heading towards the opening in the wind veil of assimilation, rushing for its freedom. The final one was the Rank 9 Wisdom Gu. Fang Yuan had once seen it inside the True Inheritance secluded domain, if not for Mo Yao's will reminding him back then, he may have nearly lost his life under Wisdom Gu's influence. Being as high as rank 9, Wisdom Gu which was recorded inside the Legends of Renzu was definitely extraordinary. It gave off the light of wisdom. Basking in this light, lifeforms would lose their lifespan rapidly, thoughts would be created and destroyed in their minds quickly, they would collide with each other and create the sparks of wisdom in the process. When a person thinks, countless thoughts would be created, destroyed, or collide into each other, to obtain the results of thinking. Wisdom path, with this principle, became one of the paths of Gu masters. The light of wisdom would increase the number of thoughts to the limit, the speed of thinking would be raised to the limit, and the collisions would occur at the most rapid rate. By reducing the time to think greatly, one could attain greater effects. This was the true effect of Wisdom Gu. That's right, Wisdom Gu also has a wild will, and had been hiding since long ago. Now that the wind veil of assimilation is broken, it is instinctively trying to escape. Except that it had remained silent until now before suddenly striking. Fang Yuan realized at once. Fang Yuan felt no shock towards how Wisdom Gu was able to easily deal great damage to Giant Sun's will. It has been mentioned previously, Wisdom Path is classified into thought, will, and emotion. What were wills made up of? Multiple thoughts. Under the shining light of wisdom, these thoughts collided intensely, they expanded and faced destruction rapidly. If the light was shown on humans, new thoughts would develop in their minds. But Giant Sun Immortal Venerable was dead. This was only a will that he left behind. This special will was just like the formless hands, without a source of energy. Under the light of wisdom, these thoughts collided at an extremely fast pace. They were rapidly destroyed but no new thoughts were generated. The dragon of Giant Sun's will was thus easily snapped into two. It could be said that Wisdom Gu directly countered Giant Sun's will. But this advantage is not enough to take down Giant Sun's will, unless. Fang Yuan's gaze was sharp as an eagle. He looked up while enduring the piercing light from the inheritance. Indeed. He saw that in the sky, up to 100 beads of immortal essence were falling down. These yellow immortal essence were skull-sized, each was filled to the brim and they had their auras concealed. Fang Yuan's rank 6 green grape immortal essence could not hold a candle to them. These were rank 9 yellow apricot immortal essence. Giant Sun Immortal Venerable's immortal essence which he had left behind. Chapter 638, Unfilial Descendants. Immortal Gu normally required immortal essence to activate. Under most circumstances, will could not activate Gu worms alone. Even Giant Sun's will was not exempt from this rule. The reason the dragon of Giant Sun's will could activate Immortal Gu was because it was holding Giant Sun's immortal essence. However, the Wisdom Gu's attack cut apart the dragon of Giant Sun's will into two and actually revealed it was holding Giant Sun's immortal essence. As expected of Wisdom Gu. Such an amazing result in just one move. Fang Yuan's gaze brightened and praised Wisdom Gu inwardly. He had also thought of cutting apart the connection between Giant Sun's immortal essence and Giant Sun's will, but he did not have enough strength to do so. However, Wisdom Gu accomplished it. Wisdom Gu was not the slightest bit afraid of formless hands. The most terrifying formless hands only had 8 fingers while Wisdom Gu was a rank 9 immortal Gu and could only be grabbed by 9-fingered formless hands. However, Wisdom Gu was extremely fragile despite being rank 9. It was not an offense-oriented Gu and could still be destroyed. It wanted freedom and wanted to soar to the skies, and the dragon of Giant Sun's will which possessed many immortal Gu was its primary obstacle. From Wisdom Gu's perspective, dealing with the dragon of Giant Sun's will was of the utmost importance. Thus, it concealed itself and waited for an opportunity to strike. It remained inconspicuous when it did not make a move, but when it made a move, it was extremely shocking, striking the weak point of the Giant Sun's will dragon and cutting its connection with Giant Sun's immortal essence in one move, thereby causing the immortal Gu controlled by Giant Sun's will, more than 10 in number, to be of no use. Giant Sun's will let out a furious roar at the heavy damage. However, it did not turn around to attack Wisdom Gu and instead relentlessly chased after the Luck Path True Inheritance which was holding Ma and Zhao. Giant Sun's will instantly condensed into a huge golden hand that struck towards Ma and Zhao like a meteor. For a moment, the whole battle situation turned into this. The wind veil of assimilation was separating the ruins of Imperial Court Blessed Land from the outside world of Northern Plains. In the outside world were Northern Plains Gu immortals. Inside was the ruins of Imperial Court Blessed Land. There was a giant tear in the wind veil of assimilation from which countless Gu worms flew out, sparking conflicts among the Gu immortals. Inside the wind veil. At the highest point was the Luck Path True Inheritance which had turned into a rainbow and flew rapidly towards the tear in the wind veil of assimilation. It was already close to it. In the middle was the huge hand of Giant Sun's will which could no longer activate Immortal Gu. Below Giant Sun's will was Wisdom Gu which was following closely. Even further below in the mid-air was the deadlock between Fang Yuan and He Lulan. On the ground were dozens of surviving Gu masters. Formless hands were attracted towards the Gu worms that filled the sky, and as such the Gu master's situation was a lot better. The huge hand of giant sun's will which had burst out with all its strength was rapidly closing the distance between it and the luck path true inheritance. Crackle crackle crackle. Giant sun's will was bursting out with explosive sounds. Wisdom Gu was not far below and giant sun's will had all along been under the light of wisdom, its thoughts violently collided and perished. The huge hand of giant sun's will was shrinking rapidly at a visible speed. However, the light of wisdom Gu was not just exhausting giant sun's will, the intense collisions of the will was further increasing the speed and power of the huge hand of giant sun's will. Finally, when the luck path true inheritance was just about to charge into the wind veil, the huge hand of giant sun's will was able to block its path. None of you can escape, die. The huge hand of giant sun's will grabbed down with extreme killing intent, not caring that the luck path true inheritance was a unique existence and just focused on killing Ma and Zhao. Are we going to die? Ma and Zhao hugged each other, terror and shock filled them as they looked at the giant hand falling down upon them. Boom! Powerful attacks rained down like a hailstorm, smashing down ruthlessly at the huge hand of giant sun's will. You unfilial descendants! Giant sun's will let out a furious roar as its giant hand collapsed. The luck path true inheritance carried Ma and Zhao, and flew through the wind veil of assimilation to the outside world of northern plains. These are immortal Gu. Grab the immortal Gu. They are mine, all mine. How could the righteous path Gu immortals whose hearts were filled with greed know about the identity of the giant hand of will? Even if they knew, would they just look on as the huge hand of will crushed the immortal Gu? A man whose heart cannot be satisfied is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. The luck path true inheritance was brimming with dense immortal Gu aura which further intensified the greed of the northern plains Gu immortals. Fight! Courting death, who dares to seize the immortal Gu in front of me? You shameless bastards! Did you guys forget the agreement we made earlier? Verbal agreements between Gu immortals were already fragile, who would comply with such agreements in front of huge profits? The northern plains Gu immortals removed all consideration for face and grabbed at the luck path true inheritance. The majestic auras of the Gu immortals collided against each other. Ma Hongyun and Zhao Lianyun blacked out, almost fainting on the spot. They had left the wolf's nest and entered the tiger's den. This aura and radiance, I am not wrong, this definitely is connected to luck path. Everyone moved together. Suddenly, a long and loud whooshing sound rang out. Over 10 Gu immortals appeared. At the lead was an old Gu immortal with a snow-white beard that reached the toes. The righteous path Gu immortals narrowed their eyes at the sight of this man. Someone cried out in surprise, introducing this man's origins. Old Ancestor Xuehu, you actually came in person. Old Ancestor Xuehu was the leader of Snowy Mountain Blessed Land, a rank 8 Gu immortal and the number 1 demonic path Gu immortal of Northern Plains. Following him were Snowy Mountain Blessed Land's demonic path Gu immortals, legendary experts whose names were known far and wide. Imperial Court Blessed Land is about to be destroyed, of course I have to come and reap some benefits. Enough nonsense, strike! Old Ancestor Xuehu screamed out before leading the group behind him to join in the fight. The scene turned even more chaotic. Righteous and demonic factions battled with all sorts of Gu worms flying about. The luck path true inheritance changed hands several times. Ma and Zhao were in a precarious situation, walking on the edge of life and death. Don't fight. Inside the wind veil of assimilation there are definitely many more immortal Gu. A Gu immortal shouted in the chaos. The 3 immortals of Chanyu, make your move. The wind veil of assimilation is closing up. Another Gu immortal gave a reminder from within the chaotic battlefield. The 3 Chanyu immortals had gathered with the Gu immortal Tong Zhu as the lead. They hurriedly glanced below when they heard the reminder. Sure enough, the tear on the wind veil of assimilation was already closing up and there was only a thin crack remaining. The tear that winged blade had created was extremely large, but the wind veil of assimilation's recovery speed was very fast. Gu Immortal Tong Zhu had estimated the cut would be closed in 8 breaths of time. And from the looks of it, it indeed took around 8 breaths. If they used the winged blade now, they would be able to open up a tear again. However, Chanyu tribe's 3 immortals showed no signs of using it. This immortal path killer move had extremely terrifying power, but the price to pay was equally large, consuming a lot of immortal essence. And in this chaotic situation, the 3 Chanyu immortals did not dare to use it again so as to keep it in reserve to intimidate enemies. Brother He Cheng, what are we going to do now? He tribe's Gu immortal, He Bai, lost his cool when he saw the wind veil of assimilation closing up, and hurriedly consulted Gu immortal He Cheng. He Cheng was silent, his expression extremely unsightly. He Bai had been seeking immortal Gu wooden chicken since long ago. They had also received information from He Lu Lan that he had already obtained the immortal Gu. But the wind veil of assimilation was now closed. He Lu Lan had not escaped when he had the chance, causing He Bai's plan to be fruitless. He Cheng did not have the ability to cut apart the wind veil of assimilation. His voice turned extremely gloomy. Brother He Bai, you still have a chance. Those formless hands inside the wind veil are extremely likely to have seized wooden chicken Gu. When they travel through space and their energy is used up, the captured Gu worms will also be freed. The investigative abilities of Gu immortals were much stronger than that of Gu masters. After the tear was opened on the wind veil of assimilation, they had immediately glanced at the dangers within the wind veil. And because of the formless hands as well, they did not dare to enter the wind veil and risk themselves. It's like that? He Bai's eyes brightened before he thought of something, then nephew He Lu Lan. He Cheng didn't speak, but his expression turned even more gloomy. He Lu Lan did not grab the opportunity to escape the wind veil of assimilation. This made Fang Yuan inwardly shocked. However, he did not have the time to ponder over this and threw it to the back of his mind. He fixed his gaze on the falling immortal essence of Giant Sun. His mind was filled completely with the thoughts of this immortal essence of Giant Sun. Gu masters cannot use the primeval essence of others. Gu immortals were also unable to use the immortal essence of others. After Fang Yuan obtained Hu Immortal Blessed Land, he had obtained a lot of green grape immortal essence left behind by Hu Immortal. But only the land spirit, Little Hu Immortal, could use this immortal essence. Land spirits were formed from a Gu immortal's obsession. Giant Sun's immortal essence also could only be used by Giant Sun's will. Even if Fang Yuan obtained this immortal essence, he would not be able to use them. But this did not affect Fang Yuan's resolve to seize the immortal essence of Giant Sun even a little bit. I can't use it, but as long as I seize all this immortal essence, the power of Giant Sun's will drop down to 20 to 30%. Fang Yuan soared to the sky, crazily activating all sorts of movement Gu to increase his speed. This exceptionally good opportunity was created by Wisdom Gu. Fang Yuan would not be worthy of being an authoritative figure of the demonic path if he did not grab this chance. You dare! Attacked by his own descendants, and now sensing what Fang Yuan was attempting, Giant Sun's will was furious as well as anxious. Without immortal essence, it was not able to activate immortal Gu and could only use the power of its special will to battle. It understood the severity of this more than anyone else. Fang Yuan's extremely fast speed gave Giant Sun's will an unprecedented fear. Damn it, it's too late. The will condensed back together into a giant hand which fell down like a meteor. Ha ha ha. Fang Yuan threw his head back and laughed loudly. He was less than 100 steps away from Giant Sun's immortal essence. Even if Giant Sun's will was mighty, Fang Yuan was not worried. Because between Fang Yuan and Giant Sun's will was the rank 9 Wisdom Gu. Check new. Oval ch. Chapters at NOV.com. Wisdom Gu is the bane of Giant Sun's will. Giant Sun's will would have to detour around Wisdom Gu, which would waste a lot more time. He Lulan does not have high speed and he still has to hold Tai by Yunsheng, so he can't chase me. The only worry is the formless hands. Fang Yuan thought of every possible scenario with his understanding of the whole situation. Wind whistled past, Giant Sun's immortal essence was already within reach. Chapter 639, Giant Sun flaunts his might, Fang Yuan receives help. Seeing that he was about to succeed, Fang Yuan's lips curled into a faint smile. But that did not stop unexpected events from happening. Wisdom Gu quickly descended, as the light of wisdom shrouded Fang Yuan. Once he entered the wisdom halo, Fang Yuan's thoughts were created and destroyed intensely, he aged rapidly. This? Fang Yuan was shocked, raising his head to take a look, he saw Wisdom Gu descending towards himself. Meanwhile, Giant Sun's will, which had lost a huge portion of its body, shrunk into a tiny ball and followed closely after. In reality, Giant Sun's will knew that if he took a detour around Wisdom Gu, he would not be able to stop Fang Yuan. Thus, he forcefully got close to Wisdom Gu and used a technique to send it flying. Although Wisdom Gu countered Giant Sun's will was large enough, and after paying a huge price, he could barely come into contact with Wisdom Gu by risking his life. This way, Wisdom Gu was like a rubber ball flying straight for Fang Yuan. It became greatly troublesome for Fang Yuan now. As expected of Giant Sun. Seeing Wisdom Gu approaching himself, Fang Yuan could not help but praise Giant Sun's will's decision. He laughed heartily, his heart was extremely resolute. If you, Giant Sun, could make such a sacrifice, why can't I, Gu Fang Yuan? Thus, Fang Yuan endured the light of wisdom and used his method to sweep away all of the falling immortal essence of Giant Sun. Immediately afterwards, he used Wind Flower Gu to change his direction, moving to the side and trying to get away from Wisdom Gu. Wisdom Gu continued to descend, as Fang Yuan narrowly passed by it. Cough, cough, cough. Fang Yuan coughed non-stop, he was finally out of the range of the light of wisdom. But his face no longer had the appearance of a young man, anyone who saw him would think he was a middle-aged man. The closer one was to Wisdom Gu, the more intense the light of wisdom would be. Earlier, when Fang Yuan was inside the True Inheritance secluded domain, he was still a great number of steps away from Wisdom Gu, but in just a few breaths' time, he lost 2 years of his life. Earlier, he was so close to Wisdom Gu, and had endured the light of wisdom for such a long time, thus he lost more than 10 years of lifespan. Ordinary people only had 100 years of lifespan. In order to snatch Giant Sun's immortal essence, Fang Yuan paid a heavy price. Little scoundrel, die. Drawing an arc in the air like lightning, Giant Sun's will pounced like an eagle. Fang Yuan immediately felt an intense sensation of danger and death assaulting him. At the crucial moment, he only had time to activate Six-Armed Heavenly Zombie King. Bam! With a loud bang, Fang Yuan was swatted like a fly. Crashing down like a meteor, he landed heavily on the ground, forming a huge crater. Rocks were sent flying as dust clouds formed. Fang Yuan was lying in the deepest part of the crater, he regained his senses 3 breaths of time later. Out of his 8 arms, 6 were broken. His entire back was in a terrible state, his spine and ribcages could be seen. He was dizzy, he could barely think. The attack of Giant Sun's will earlier had not just targeted his body, but a large amount of special wills entered his mind, trying to destroy it and affect his cognitive ability. While only barely conscious, Fang Yuan actually dodged without thinking about it. The next moment, Giant Sun's will in the form of a huge golden axe swung down from high in the sky, cutting away Fang Yuan's left arm and left leg. If Fang Yuan did not dodge in time, perhaps he would have been split into 2 by this attack. As his consciousness recovered, Fang Yuan quickly used his sole remaining palm to support himself, his immense strength pushing his body out of the crater. But as he was doing so, Giant Sun's will turned into a huge golden hammer, flying into the sky and slamming towards Fang Yuan. Bam! Fang Yuan was like a giant elephant who was hit while running. His ribcage was completely broken while his intestines were crushed to bits due to the impact. At the same time, in his mind, he was invaded by Giant Sun's will again, as he fell into greater confusion. Fang Yuan was like a rubber ball that was slammed on the ground. He rolled along the ground as he flew, causing a long trail to appear on the ground where he was sent flying. The intense collision caused his clothes to be torn, and he was covered in dust. Eventually, he sprawled on the ground weakly, motionless. His broken bones and hanging flesh were all exposed. As blood flowed, they were not red. Instead, his blood had a deep green color due to Six-Armed Heavenly Zombie King. His expression was distorted, his fangs were exposed as he struggled in pain. At this moment, there was a huge battle in Fang Yuan's mind. The battle of wills was intense, and Giant Sun's will had the upper hand. Fang Yuan was taking a beating passively. Although he resisted stubbornly, he could barely think clearly now. Only after he exterminated the portion of Giant Sun's will in his mind could he reawaken and regain his consciousness. But Giant Sun's will would not give him such a chance. It condensed into a golden sword, 16 meters long and 6 meters wide. It gave off an indomitable aura, and had the ability to judge all beings. This is Giant Sun's will's true battle strength? This is too terrifying. Far away, He Lu Lan held the unconscious Tai by Yun Sheng as he said with a tongue-tied expression. Giant Sun's will had refined many immortal Gu, and was struck by Wisdom Gu and also attacked by a group of over 20 Gu immortals. In the end, he had to make a sacrifice and forcefully charge ahead to send Wisdom Gu flying. After all these, he had suffered great injuries. His mass was a minuscule fraction compared to the time he was slumbering. But even so, Fang Yuan had no way of fighting back. And without using a single immortal Gu, no wonder He Lu Lan watched with such nervousness. This battle strength was simply too terrifying. But immediately after, He Lu Lan calmed down. No, the special will is not this strong. But earlier, Ancestor Giant Sun struck at the perfect moment. While he was unprepared, he dealt a serious blow. The scoundrel wanted to retaliate, but he could not think as his mind was already invaded by the special will, falling into chaos. If he was prepared and had ample time to react, it would not have ended this way. The main factor was because he inherited old ancestors' battle experience. He is ruthless and decisive. Once he finds an opening, he would strike at the opponent's weakness and give him no chance of fighting back. Especially the will invading the mind. This is too scary. It is simply impossible to fight back. It seems that I need to be careful about this when fighting a Wisdom Path Gu master. He Lu Lan reminded himself as he landed slowly on the ground. He looked at the Sword of Will. It was floating and eventually landed above Fang Yuan. The tip of the blade was right on top of his brain. This guy is finished. He Lu Lan muttered softly. The great foe before him had landed in such a state because of a mistake that was strictly not his fault. He felt some relief, some joy, and even a slight sadness. The strength of Giant Sun's will was due to the battle experience that it had inherited from Giant Sun Immortal Venerable. Although Fang Yuan had 500 years of experience, in this aspect, Giant Sun's will was much stronger than him and had much greater experience. Once Giant Sun's will gets a chance, he would attack consecutively and gain the upper hand, expanding on his advantage and preventing Fang Yuan from recovering any of his footing. Giant Sun Immortal Venerable was not only lucky, this aspect of him displayed his invincible nature, his firm and domineering battle talent. It's over. He Lu Lan looked at Tai Bai Yun Sheng who was in his arms. Inside the wind veil of assimilation, he was Fang Yuan's only ally, but now he was unconscious. He Lu Lan threw him onto the ground casually, his gaze fixed on the sword of Giant Sun's will. Without hesitation, the sword of giant suns will shot down soundlessly, the tip of the sword pointed at Fang Yuan's brain. Even though Fang Yuan was in six-arm heavenly zombie king state, and had transformed into the body of a zombie, but once his head was pierced, giant suns would completely destroy his brain, along with his entire soul. This was a truly fatal blow. Tai Bai Yunsheng had fainted, Fang Yuan was unconscious, he had no way to fight back. But just when the sword's tip was about to reach Fang Yuan's forehead, with just an inch away, a water wall suddenly appeared. At the same time, a shrill woman's voice could be heard, "With me here, don't think of taking his life." "Who is this?" He Lulan gasped. He looked at the water wall with shock. The surface of the water wall had turned into a spiral, coiling around the sword tip and preventing the sword of giant suns from descending. At the same time, a strong aura burst out from Fang Yuan's body. Giant suns pulled back the sword, retreating several hundred steps away rapidly. He stood in the air for a moment before saying in a low voice, as he remembered, "It's you. Over 10,000 years ago, you barged into 88 Truyang building, you were the one who freed fortune rivaling Heaven Gu." Mo Yao laughed delicately, "I'm surprised you remember. 7 sit n. Velb. /n. C/. M for L. Test. Vels. Saying this, the water wall turned into a liquid armor that covered Fang Yuan's body. A light blue glow surrounded Fang Yuan, causing his wounds to heal rapidly, his broken limbs, flesh and bones were all rapidly healing. Giant Suns was able to remember because 88 Truyang building had recording goo worms that filmed all that had happened inside it. When Mo Yao explored 88 Truyang building, she did not wake up Giant Sun's will. But this time, after Fang Yuan woke up Giant Sun's will, he used the respective goo worms to look through the records, learning what had happened. Mo Yao's voice, appearance, Fang Yuan's name as well as his wicked deeds inside 88 Truyang building, Giant Suns was very aware of all of them, that was why he was able to expose the secret of the Changshan Yin impersonation. Giant Suns was extremely furious, "You unscrupulous and shameless thieves, you have been targeting my Truyang building for tens of thousands of years. Die!" Giant Suns attacked with rage, the golden sword flew like lightning, piercing the air and drawing a golden rainbow in the air. The rainbow hit the liquid armor, causing ripples on it, but could not pierce the armor's protection. Fang Yuan slowly woke up. "This is the rank 7 Immortal Gu House Water Pavilion." He looked at the liquid armor on him and realized. It turns out that since an unknown time ago, Water Pavilion had been on him. When he was in a chaotic state and his life was at risk, Mo Yao's activated Water Pavilion and protected him. Giant Suns could control 88 Truyang building, Mo Yao's could naturally manipulate Water Pavilion. 88 Truyang building had Giant Sun Immortal Venerable's Yellow Apricot Immortal Essence, how could Water Pavilion not have Fairy Mo Yao's Red Date Immortal Essence? "Lad, you are finally awake. The immortal essence that my main body had left behind is limited, Water Pavilion's consumption is too great, quickly take over the battle, I will defend your mind." Mo Yao's said. Chapter 640, Fang Yuan vs. Giant Sun's Will. "Humph, I could escape death all thanks to you, fairy." Fang Yuan squinted, his eyes shining with cold light. He loosened his joints, rubbing his palms as his newly born bones creaked, his battle intent surged again. "If you want to repay me, return Water Pavilion to Spirit Affinity House." Mo Yao's sighed, quickly battle. "Ha ha ha, okay." Fang Yuan howled, jumping up. He had turned into six-arm heavenly zombie king form, it had great physical strength. With green eyes and fangs, he looked extremely vicious and ruthless. The water armor shrunk into a lump, before turning into a helmet, protecting his head. This way, he was no longer afraid of Giant Sun's will's mental attack. Without any worries left, Fang Yuan took huge steps forward, raising his fists and punching at Giant Sun's will. Swoosh! The expected impact did not occur, instead, there was a light sound. Giant Sun's will was very experienced, he did not fight with Fang Yuan directly. At the crucial moment, the sword turned into a golden ribbon and coiled around Fang Yuan's wrist lightly, before flying away like a flash of light. Fang Yuan's hammer-like fist was cut apart around the wrist and fell on the ground. Even with the defense of Fang Yuan's six-armed heavenly zombie king, it could not match Giant Sun's will's sharpness. Fang Yuan rolled away and quickly picked up his hand. The injury on his arm was oozing with green blood slowly. Fang Yuan paid attention to Giant Sun's will while pressing the fist back onto the wound on his arm. The flesh on the wound quickly mended and healed, even the bones started to join together. This was the strong regenerative ability of six-armed heavenly zombie king. But why would Giant Sun's will give Fang Yuan time to recover? The will turned into a sword resembling a rainbow and charged at Fang Yuan again. Fang Yuan squinted, he pushed with his legs as his body shot into the sky. The sword rainbow followed closely behind him, chasing relentlessly. Fang Yuan activated for Eagle Rise Gu at the same time, but the sword rainbow was faster, as their distance was pulled closer. Fang Yuan activated Wind Flower Gu again. He had already lost track of which Wind Flower Gu this was, all in all, he had already expended a lot of them. Wind Flower Gu allowed Fang Yuan to change directions rapidly, but the sword rainbow of will was even more agile. Not only did their distance not become larger, the rainbow made use of this chance to catch up to Fang Yuan. At once, the two sides fought intensely in the air, exchanging blows. The sword rainbow of will drew a golden arc in the air, circling around Fang Yuan and attacking from time to time. Fang Yuan was completely at a disadvantage. Six-armed heavenly zombie king's strong defense was extremely weak when matched against the sword rainbow of will. Flesh kept falling from the sky. These were all cut off from Fang Yuan's body by the sword rainbow of will. Thankfully, after activating six-armed heavenly zombie king, Fang Yuan lost his sense of pain. Together with Water Pavilion as a helmet, Giant Sun's will did not manage to succeed in attacking Fang Yuan's mind. You're not making any progress. Seeing that Fang Yuan was not taking back the lead, in fact he was taking more of a beating and finding fewer and fewer chances to retaliate, Mo Yao's will was getting anxious. Easy for you to say. Fang Yuan snorted, his gaze becoming more ruthless. Giant Sun's will was different from ordinary enemies, he hardly had any mass and was extremely quick, even when turning. Fang Yuan's flying master attainment was nothing compared to it. Giant Sun's will did not have a fixed form, it could turn into a sword rainbow to cut, an axe to chop, a rain of needles for a wide-range attack, or even a hammer for a strong blow. The most troublesome thing was that he could split and form at will. Suddenly, he could split into 2 or 3 sword rainbows and do a pincer attack, distracting Fang Yuan. At times, he could turn into 1 hammer and 1 sword. The hammer would strike at Fang Yuan's defense while the sword would shoot like lightning. All sorts of combinations were used flexibly, with absolutely no errors. One could say, he fully displayed the advantages and abilities of a will in battle. Meanwhile, Fang Yuan had been reborn, and walked on the strength and enslavement paths. He was skilled at fighting head-on, attacking fists with fists, or using numbers to suppress the enemy. But meeting this kind of enemy was something he had no methods to deal with. He was at a disadvantage, taking hits passively, that was very natural. In the sky, Fang Yuan's green-black figure clashed with Giant Sun's will's golden rainbow, forming a large battle arena. Great numbers of goo worms were still flying around, their instincts were telling them to give way to Fang Yuan and Giant Sun's will, while avoiding the attacks of the formless hands. Even though so many goo worms flew out, there are still countless goo worm groups left here. I cannot begin to imagine how many immortal goo were used to form 88 True Yang building. Yi Lui Sang raised his head and sighed, the injuries on his body had mostly healed. At the crucial moment, his status of being the leader of a super tribe worked. Yi Lui Sang obtained the help of other Gu masters. There are not many formless hands left, although we have lost many Gu worms. There are so many Gu worms here, we can capture them now and regain our battle strength. Some Gu masters suggested. This suggestion was quickly supported by the other Gu masters. We need to work together sincerely, we need to be fast. The wind veil of assimilation is getting thicker, it is spreading and the space in here will continue to shrink. He Lu Lan looked at the unconscious Tai by Yun Sheng, walking over. The wind veil of assimilation is not something us mortals can deal with. To escape with our lives, we need Ancestor Giant Sun's strength. Everyone was silent. Above them, in the air, Fang Yuan and Giant Sun's will were engaging in fierce combat. At times, furious growls and shouting could be heard. Be it Fang Yuan or Giant Sun's will's terrifying battle strength, everyone was scared. They subconsciously avoided those two and did not want to interfere in the battle of these two top experts. But He Lu Lan's words were extremely true. Relying on the mortal Gu that they subdue, no matter how many they have, they cannot break the wind veil of assimilation. He Lu Lan asked again, "Don't worry, how can this scoundrel be Ancestor Giant Sun's match? Can't you see that Ancestor is having the upper hand all along?" Everyone's eyes were shining. The battle situation was very visible in the sky, everyone could clearly tell what was happening. He Lu Lan changed the direction of the conversation. Although Ancestor has the upper hand, he cannot turn the advantage into victory. The root of the problem is that Ancestor's immortal essence has been completely taken by that scoundrel. Ancestor has over a dozen immortal Gu, but he cannot use any of them. Everyone nodded, they agreed with He Lu Lan's analysis. Yi Lui Sang asked, "Then what do we do next?" He Lu Lan laughed heartily, displaying Tai by Yun Xing in his hands. "I have captured this old thief, he is that guy's senior brother, they share a tight bond. Our ability is limited, we can only try to help old Ancestor. My suggestion is still the same, we should capture Gu worms first to increase our strength. In order to cooperate well, we should report all of the Gu worms that we have now. I will start." Gu masters were normally very secretive about the Gu worms that they owned. This was important information. Once it was exposed, others could use it against them and they might lose their lives. However, this was a special circumstance where their lives were about to be lost. Thus, everyone could only do this to increase the hopes of their survival. He Lu Lan was a natural leader and had a fierce reputation. As he took the lead to expose his own Gu worms, the remaining Gu masters followed along and He Lu Lan was able to recruit these people into his force once again. Re. D. The latest stories. NNOV. Ulbin.com. He Lu Lan had great ambitions. He wanted to ascend to immortal and needed a strength path immortal Gu for it, thus he needed to rely on Giant Sun's will. These people were the pawns that he needed to fulfill his ambition. In the sky, the battle was already at its climax. "I've caught you!" Fang Yuan howled, pouncing down as his 6 arms that were tougher than steel grabbed the sword made of Giant Sun's will at lightning speed. But Giant Sun's will instantly split apart. Fang Yuan's long-awaited counterattack only destroyed a bit of his thoughts. "Damn it!" Fang Yuan cursed. Giant Sun's will could split and gather together. It was agile beyond belief. Fang Yuan did not have methods to deal with him, thus most of the time he could only be a punching bag without any feasible counterattacks. He did not manage to make any progress. Sigh, if there is no other choice, we can only undergo a drawn-out battle. Mo Yao's will said, Giant Sun's will has no source of energy. During the battle, he needs to think, that will accelerate the collision of his thoughts and thus the expenditure of them. Fang Yuan was concentrating on the fight while denying Mo Yao's suggestion. We cannot afford to drag this on. Don't forget 6-arm Heavenly Zombie King's weakness, it can only be used for 30 minutes. Once that time passes, the backlash of the killer move would make me a zombie. If I completely turn into six-arm heavenly zombie king form, the entire body would be zombified and both my apertures including my immortal aperture would lose all life force, my cultivation will be cut off from advancing further. Mo Yao retorted, you underestimate yourself, don't forget that you are a strength path Gu immortal, the essence of your life has undergone a qualitative change. Thus, the time that you can use the killer move has also been extended, it is far from 30 minutes. My rough estimate is that you have about an hour in length. Even so, we cannot delay this, don't forget that the wind veil of assimilation is getting thicker, shrinking the space in here. My methods cannot counter the special will, does your water pavilion have any methods? Fang Yuan asked. Mo Yao heaved a long sigh, although water pavilion is a rank 7 immortal Gu house, it is not skilled at attacking, but rather, its ability lies in concealment and movement. Most importantly, my main body only left behind 20 or so beads of red date immortal essence. After sustaining the immortal Gu house's operations over the years, there are only 5 left. If you want to use water pavilion to turn this around, you should dispel this thought. Watch out! Mo Yao suddenly alerted, but it was too late. Giant suns will feign an attack and attracted most of Fang Yuan's attention, but it suddenly made a turn and got behind him, attacking brutally. Fang Yuan vomited out a mouthful of green zombie blood, his 8 eagle wings were smashed to bits, and his spine was completely shattered, his back was caved in and his chest was caving out of his body. The intense force caused him to descend rapidly. Fang Yuan quickly mobilized his Gu worm, attempting to fly into the sky. But why would giant suns will give him this chance? It would beat the dog while it was down, the golden rainbow coiled around Fang Yuan as it attacked. Fang Yuan raised his 8 arms to cover his whole body while curling up and was barely able to protect himself. Giant suns will change shape freely, slashing, cutting, slamming, piercing, all sorts of attacks caused Fang Yuan's 8 arms to be destroyed, the 6-arm heavenly zombie king's body was tattered as there were many injuries on him from the front to back. Fortunately, Fang Yuan had turned into 6-arm heavenly zombie king form, otherwise with his human body, he would have already had a tragic death. Fighting with giant suns will gave Fang Yuan great pressure, only by using 6-arm heavenly zombie king non-stop could he barely keep up.